Hey guys, Eric Bischoff here to talk to you about my friends over at SaveWithConrad.com. Are you looking to get out of debt? Conrad and his team can make that happen faster than me firing the honky tonk man. Wow. And you know that controversy creates cash, right? But you know what doesn't create cash? Credit card debt. Save with Conrad can help you consolidate high-interest credit cards and all of your other debt into one low monthly payment. They can even help you get the cash you need for home improvements or anything else. They've helped 83 Weeks listeners save $500, $600, $700, even $800 a month. Seriously, your papers are going to go down faster than Nitro ratings in 2000. Ouch! And how about this? No house payments for 2 months. That's right, no house payments for 2 months. And unlike the dirt sheets, man, the reviews do not lie. With over 1,000 5-star reviews, find out for yourself how much Conrad and his team can save you by checking out SaveWithConrad.com today. You'll be grateful you did.
NMLS number 65084, equal housing lender. Woo!
Welcome to Something To Wrestle with Bruce Prichard.
Bruce Prichard.
Well, you know.
That's not a rib.
She pooted.
She pooted.
What a rib?
No, yeah, I mean,
There's no box of gimmicks.
Rumor and innuendo.
I don't deal in rumor and innuendo. And was he there? I was there. I don't give a shit. I ain't scared of shit.
I ain't scared of shit.
Fuck him.
Fuck you, Bruce.
I love you.
double cheeseburger, double cheese, double mayo, double onion, motherfucker.
Bruce Prichard.
It does feel a little bit like you guys are trying to build Rob Van Dam to be something special here. This is a couple of years before he would get the major push and become the world champ. What was McMahon's feeling about Van Dam at this point? A year and change prior, he had a big match with Jeff Hardy at the Invasion pay-per-view, and it felt like that could have been the first rocket ship, but it didn't happen. Here it feels like we're getting another slot with him on top. Why do you feel like Vince was a little reluctant to go with Van Dam? What didn't he get about Van Dam?
The fact that Rob wasn't the best on promos, and it all boils down to that. Vince did not feel that Van Dam had a lot of range in his personality, and Rob really wasn't willing to give us that range. Rob wanted to be who Rob Van Dam is, and Rob is a very zen kind of guy and yin and yang, and Rob wanted to be Rob, and Rob didn't want to act or do that much range. He just wanted to be himself, and Vince wanted a lot more out of him and felt that unless Rob could give him more personality and get better on his promos, that he was only going to go so far.
Is it fair to say that Booker T had the best run of anybody to come over from WCW? Because it feels like Booker T was so ingrained in everything for so long, and even still is now, that it's almost like he didn't have some of the WCW stink on him, so to speak, or he overcame it. What was it that made Booker T special? Because he was a multiple time champion here, figured it in a big way for a long time, and then still active with the company now.
Well, frankly, because I think Booker T was the best performer to come out of it at that time. Of the people that we got, and especially in the time frame that we got him, Booker T was the first big star that we got from WCW, and I think that Booker was probably the best performer of that group that came. And he continued. He continued to deliver year after year after year, and he made himself a superstar.
The match is going to go 39 minutes and 12 seconds. And of course, we know this is Shawn Michaels' crowning moment. He is going to become the world heavyweight champion here, winning the big gold belt. But I think what most people remember about this match and Shawn is the way he was dressed. He had some relatively plain brown tights. He didn't have his classic hand wraps that, matched his tights. And he had black knee pads and then like a little Dutch boy haircut. This doesn't look like the Heartbreak Kid that we remember. And I feel like this is something that a lot of the guys in the back have to be ribbing him about. I mean, his gear doesn't look finished. The actual trunks are, but not the pants part. What do you remember about these doo-doo brown Shawn Michaels tights?
That's because his gear wasn't finished and it was put together at the very last minute. You know, you left out the other part about it was his boots. He had these ugly brown boots as well that were the boots that he wore during the day and that he wore out in real life that he used for the wrestling boots that day. And it looked like, I think doo-doo brown is an accurate description, and going back and asking for help on this and going, hey, refresh my memory on some of this stuff. And some of the feedback I got was, oh my God, Shawn's ugly ass tights. That's
what everybody remembers. Yeah.
Yeah. You think about all the things that happened was, in Shawn's ugly ass tights. And I'm looking at it and I'm going, oh my God. And the boots. And it wasn't the Shawn Michaels that people were accustomed to. It wasn't the Heartbreak Kid, the flamboyant Shawn Michaels that everybody was used to. Felt kind of dull.
Well, the match wasn't dull. I guess we should say that RVD and Booker T are the first two eliminated from the chamber. But before RVD is eliminated, he goes up top to do a frog splash. And instead of the top rope, he climbs to the top of the pod. But he's not able to actually stand up completely and jump off. So he just sort of falls with a frog splash, and he winds up actually landing on Triple H's throat and injuring him pretty seriously. Tell us about this injury, Bruce.
Well, you go back in that match, even right before that spot, and RVD goes up. And this is a spot that I did love, was where Jericho reached up through the chain and pulled RVD's leg down into the pod. And I thought that was ingenious. It just was a different spot, and one that, you incorporate the pod and you have a guy that's in the pod, not in the match, being involved in the match. It was great. But when RVD came off, when we were watching it live, we're watching it and it looked like Rob came down on Hunter's ribs, but he really came down, his knee came down onto his throat. And so we asked the referee, and you can see it from behind, but I asked the referee, is Hunter okay? And Earl gave me the sign that no, he was hurt. And for Earl, especially at that time with that level of talent in there, to say somebody's hurt, they got to be hurt bad. So we sent, we had another referee that was at ringside, find out exactly what the hell was going on. And you can actually see them in the shot going back to let us know that Hunter couldn't breathe. And we contemplated, sending somebody in there and getting him the hell out of the match. But he refused to leave, and he said he would be all right. He just needed to get his breath, but he had basically crushed his throat. And he couldn't get a breath, and he couldn't breathe. And he just sat there trying to calm down and trying to get a breath. But I guess it had crushed his throat. And you can see at some point during the match, the trainer coming down on the hard camera side and talking to Hunter, and Hunter reassuring them that he was okay to continue in the match. But the whole damn thing, he had a hard time breathing and trying to get through that thing.
Wade Keller wrote, Triple H was rushed to a New York hospital after suffering a serious throat injury during the Elimination Chamber match at Survivor Series. He said the injury occurred when Rob Van Dam's knees landed across his neck after he performed a frog splash off the top of one of the cell doors of the chamber. Quote, it caused swelling on the inside of my throat, which closed down my airway. This sounds extreme, but the doctor explained to me that if somebody dropped a 10 or 20 pound weight on you from a few feet in the air and it hit you on the throat, it could crush your windpipe and kill you instantly. For me, the doctor said it was a lot of things. Rob tried to protect me as best I could. I rolled with the shot, and my neck's very thick from training it. All those things protected me, and a bit of luck too. And he says that he spent most of the next day in the hospital still wearing his gear. Quote, I basically sat bloody in the hospital in my gear until 11 or noon today. I was still in my gear, still covered in blood with confetti on my back. And the doctors told him that he wouldn't be able to wrestle for 10 days. He also addressed the rumor and innuendo that Van Dam was not safe. He says, this is a tough business, and there are certain moves in the business that are high risk moves. When we do them, we take high risk, and that's why they're called high risk moves. Every time you do one, the odds go up that something bad's going to happen. And this time something happened. The time was right, and there it was. This has nothing to do with Rob. I feel completely safe in the ring with Rob every time I'm in there with him. And of course, this comes out because Rob Van Dam had developed a little bit of a reputation for being stiff and hurting guys, whether it's right or wrong. Do you remember there being any sort of heat from the office that maybe, even though Triple H didn't think it was his fault, that somebody else?
No, accidents happen. And it was an accident, an unfortunate accident. And, you know, it happened. I think the biggest thing was getting in there and the positioning on everybody where he was, trying to stand up and not having enough room with the chamber the way that it was. But accidents happen, and you can't get upset over accidents. Well,
it's interesting that, that's one of the big takeaways from this, because I think most people remember that for that, you know, the doo-doo tights and then the neck injury or the throat injury. Lots of people are bleeding here. Of course, after RVD and Booker T are the first two eliminated, Kane and Jericho are next. That left Triple H and Shawn Michaels. But Jericho, Triple H and Shawn Michaels all bled, and they weren't able to do a lot of ridiculous spots because of the unforgiving structure, but they did do the whole thing we talked about with throwing Jericho through the bulletproof glass.
Just wasn't Canadian proof. Yeah.
Yeah. Triple H blocks a super kick attempt and then gives Shawn a pedigree. Shawn kicked out, and then Triple H goes for another pedigree, but Michaels backdrops out of it and winds up winning after the sweet chin music. Keller would write, a good final few minutes, good match overall, but not in the must-see category. Michaels didn't look like anything special in the match, so unless you were aware of his rep, his win wouldn't mean a lot. 3.5 stars. That was his takeaway. What did you think of this?
I thought it was a decent first outing. It wasn't a spectacular match. I thought that the guys worked awful hard and did some crazy stuff, but they were still feeling out what they could and couldn't do in the chamber. And I think that Triple H getting hurt kind of put limitations, because a lot of things that they had talked about and had planned in the match, they couldn't do because he wasn't able to do them. And he had to spend some time recuperating from the bump with Rob. So guys were improvising in there, and they were trying to do some different things that didn't involve Triple H until it was time and he could get back in and get involved. But I didn't think it was bad. And again, for such an unforgiving structure, they did a lot of shit in there that, you know, maybe they shouldn't have done, but at the same time they made it work. And I think that there was not a whole lot to be disappointed in.
There's a report out there that Vince went back and forth for the few weeks leading up to Survivor Series about what to do with the belts. Of course, when Brock breaks a rib, it's pretty, you know, obvious that Big Show's got to win. But there's talk that Vince wasn't sold that Shawn was able to perform at that level to justify holding the title, or wasn't over enough, and maybe was going to go with Triple H. Do you remember that being the case?
Well, going into it, it was always Triple H was going to come out of the damn thing. And at the last minute, Vince, they thought, well, everybody thinks that, everybody's calling that because Shawn's coming back, and no one's going to call Shawn winning the championship, which is true. Shawn wasn't full time. Shawn had no intentions of coming back on a full-time schedule in any way, shape, or form. So we weren't even thinking that way. And out of the blue, Vince is like, what if Shawn wins? And it's like, well, that the initial reaction, that'd be great. That'd really be great if we had Shawn on a permanent basis, and Shawn were able to work live events and work TV, and we had a actual schedule from him. But Vince was like, we'll figure that out later.
One of the things that cracked me up about the chamber is I tried to imagine myself as a performer. Like, how weird is it to be in one of those pods before they let you out? Like, that's the epitome of fish bowling. What are you supposed to do in there? Like, there's guys in there fighting, but you're in the middle of everyone in the arena. 20,000 people are looking at you. What are you supposed to do? Do you remember that being a concern for the guys? Like, hey, what do I do for 10 minutes here?
I think everybody just tried to stay in character and stay involved in the match as much as they could. It was as we learned a lot from the first chamber as to that very question there, and tried to incorporate some things for reactions from guys as we got on, and did it year after year after year. But, at first you're sitting there, basically you're sitting out there naked.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, you have to be like stereotypical pro wrestler, come on, all this bullshit, over the top nonsense, or just stand there like a fucking goof. There's almost nothing in between, is there?
Yeah. And if you're Chris Jericho, you can sit back and kind of put your feet up and be cocky heel and sit back and watch. I thought that going, the way that they did do it, and the fact that Triple H did get hurt probably helped us a little bit, but the way that they were able to pair off and have kind of single stuff. If I was in one of those matches, again, you look at it from a shoot point of view. Are you going to get in a fight if you don't have to?
Right.
If somebody's kicking somebody else's ass, as long as they're not kicking your ass or you're not in danger of being eliminated, why are you going to get in there? Just psychology wise. And I always go back to the spot in 1992 in the Royal Rumble, Jake the Snake Roberts, and Jake coming in and Jake throwing the snake in the ring. And then whoever it was, they were going through and they're wrestling, and Jake just went in the corner and sat there and watched. Why is he going to get involved? They're fighting.
Right.
So psychologically, we lose sight of that because it's a work. Well, this guy's coming in. What's he going to do? Fuck, watch. Pick your spot. Wait till it makes sense. So I thought they did a good job of that.
So according to the rumor and innuendo, he uses the relationship with Pat to get a couple of tryout matches. And he gets a tryout match where he gets a win over the Brooklyn Brawler and then loses to Owen Hart and Chris Candido. But he shows the decision makers in the company enough to get an opportunity to go train in the USWA. So he's got a spot here now in the USWA, and we'll break down that run in a minute. But at the time, who would have been in those decision-making spots? Is this JR? Is Pat Patterson line it up, puts a word in with JR? JR lines it up, reviews the tape. Is Vince involved in that? Did you see any of the tape?
Actually, it was me, and it was as a favor to Pat. The whole tryout, everything, Pat kept telling me about Dewey Johnson. You got to see Dewey Johnson. That's what they called Dwayne. And Pat asked me, he said, could you just give him a tryout? Could you guys, you always bring it out of page. You always bring people to TV. Bring him to TV and give him a tryout. So brought him out, and I believe that his first match for us, his first tryout was at the Summit in Houston. But we brought him out. He was greener than grass, but he had a presence in the ring,
right,
and he looked good. He looked like an athlete. So we were starting the developmental and thought, well, let's bring him up and put him in developmental and see how he does.
There's a phrase in the business called it. Either guys have it or they don't have it. Even in those early tryout matches, and obviously, as you said, he's green as a gourd. Did you think he had it?
He had it walking in the building.
So he had a presence about him, but maybe he just hadn't put it all together yet.
Right. But he walked in, he was cocky, he was confident, and he walked in like he was somebody. So you all of a sudden, he made heads turn because he's a big, good looking bastard. And you're thinking, oh my God, who is this guy? So he needed to be, I always would tell my brother, hey man, you trained The Rock. And he would always say to me, he goes, no, Rock didn't need to be trained. He just needed to be told what to do with what he had. So he had it. So
when he takes it to the USWA, he's repackaged as, or I guess just packaged since this is his debut really, Flex Kavana. I don't know what to say here. Flex fucking Kavana.
That was something I think Lawler and Rock came up with. It was, Flex Kavana. And you know why?
Why?
So he could sell pictures. A good-looking baby face that had a great body, and so make him a baby face and give him this crazy name. And he liked it because it sounded exotic, and you can sell gimmicks.
when he's here in the USWA, he wins the tag titles a couple of times, and he has some matches with Jerry Lawler. Were you guys keeping tabs on his progress at USWA? Who's reviewing tape at that time? Or are you just waiting on somebody to call and say, hey, it's time?
No, we're the ones that sent him to Memphis to go down there and work. So it was during a time that we were working with Memphis, and I got the Memphis tapes every single week. So we were keeping tabs on him and watching him every week. There were a few guys that were down there. I don't remember if Kurt was there yet or not, but it was all during that same time frame.
So the word is he gets a call sometime in the summer, I guess, of 1996. And he signs a WWF contract, and he goes to the warehouse, which I guess you guys were calling Trax at the time. Is that right? Where he trained with,
No, Trax didn't come until much later with, that was a Tough Enough thing that they called Trax, which was across the tracks from the TV studio. This time it was in the warehouse of the TV studio, and it was a ring in the middle of the warehouse, and that's all it was. And Tom trained guys.
including Mark Henry and Brackus, right?
Correct.
What did your brother Tom think at the time when he first got a rookie Rock were his strengths and weaknesses?
Well, considering what he had up until that point of Mark Henry and Brackus, his initial thought was, thank God. He had somebody that knew how to take bumps. He had somebody that understood what the wrestling business was because Rock grew up in it, and someone that really wanted to be a wrestler and had a strong desire to be a wrestler. So he was happy to have Rock in there because it was someone that you could actually see a future for.
So a guy like The Rock, who's in your developmental territory, when he signs the real contract to come up and he's going to start training in the warehouse, would he have had a meeting with Vince McMahon by this point, or would it be once he was shooting vignettes and such before that happened?
No, and I don't even think we shot vignettes with him per se. I really don't even remember. I remember the whole thing about bringing him in his debut in Madison Square Garden and the whole name thing. But, you know, he met Vince obviously when he came up for TV, and he had known Vince since he was a kid. So it was just kind of a reacquainting period. But it was something that Vince always kind of kept an eye on the guys in the warehouse. In Vince's head, you know, he's looking at his star in the warehouse is Mark Henry.
Right.
World's strongest man.
Sure.
And Rock is just a third generation. He's Rocky's kid.
Which at the time could be great or it could be awful. I mean, there's almost no in between. It's either you use this as an opportunity to become a superstar or you're Eric Watts.
Right. Nobody knew.
Right.
So it was, you know, we're going to have to wait and see, but he was definitely progressing a whole hell of a lot faster than anybody else in there. And he had, as you say, he had it.
When do you think the decision was made, and how does the decision become, okay, he's ready? So he's in the warehouse sometime in the summer of 96. By October of 96, you guys are airing vignettes. I know you might not remember them, but you've got Kevin Kelly talking with Rocky outside. You're showing highlights of him doing some things on the ring and lifting weights. It's not like a real a package treatment that you may have done with a $1 Million Man character or a Mr. Perfect character, but you're still building some anticipation and introducing him to the audience. So in between that summer and October, I mean, that seems like a pretty quick progression. Who makes the call? Is that something your brother says, guys, he's ready?
No, that was something that we did. And Jim Cornette actually had a lot to do with it. I remember Cornette looking at him going, God damn, he's third generation. Motherfucker looks like a Greek god walking around in there. We got to be able to do something with him. He's a babyface. He can be the champion. And, you know, Vince was a little hesitant, believe it or not, at first. And we got into the argument as to, because everybody called him Dewey.
Right.
And Rock hates that name. It's
Well,
like, my name is Dwayne. And so the more he would say that my name's Dwayne, the more that Pat would call him Dewey. But that's how we kind of knew him. And then Cornette was a big proponent of bringing Rock in and starting him. Young, new. Some of
the creative, the drawings are out there. You know, we've all heard about this, where the creative services department, I suppose, would do sketches of what they thought this character might look like. And some of those are floating around. Who would have helped put that together with, I don't know. How would you describe the ring entrance outfit he wore to the ring as Rocky Maivia?
Polynesian. I think I kind of summed it up, and that was I remember, and it's flowing, and they had stuff, hanging from his neck and everything. And when he moves, and it's all flowing, and it's like streamers hanging from his body. But the whole look was to capitalize on the Polynesian feel. And when we kind of, we're going back and forth, what the hell do we name him? And it came up to, the whole Rocky Maivia. You take the first name of his father and the last name of his grandfather, put them together, and it tells you about his legacy right there in his name.
And is that something creative would have put together, or who combines the names?
The name was something that we came up with in Vince's dining room.
So when you explain all of this and show the sketches to Dwayne, who's involved in that? Who's kind of laying it out to him and saying, okay, kid, here's what we got for you?
I want to say that was probably Vince and I that did that with him. When we laid everything out, asked him, because we asked for his input too. What are you comfortable with? What do you like? And at that time, he was just happy to have a job. Right. He was happy to be a part of it.
So chat me up about the way this is laid out, because I think a lot of us have heard that Vince has a tendency to try to really go into sell mode whenever he's trying to explain the gimmick to a performer for the first time. What might it have sounded like as he kind of expressed what his vision of Rocky Maivia was going to be to Dwayne?
God damn, you have to embody everything about your father, the strength of Rocky, and you have to be able to embrace the heritage of your grandfather, Peter, High Chief Peter Maivia. And it's all embodied in you with the Polynesian flow. But when you get in the ring, we want to see that shuffle like your old man used to do. God damn, pal. It was a tough sell, believe it or not.
Really?
Because Dwayne wanted to be his own man. He didn't want to
ride the coattails.
He didn't want to ride the coattails. Yeah, I guess is the right. He wanted to be his own man. He didn't want to be Rocky Jr. He didn't want to be High Chief Peter Maivia's grandson. He's very proud of his heritage, extremely proud of his heritage, but he wanted to make his own way. And he just thought that, well, is this capitalizing on that too much? And we obviously thought it was perfect for him.
Do you know how Rocky felt about it?
I don't. At the time, I don't. And they were, they've had a kind of off and on relationship for many years. I don't know that it was necessarily on at that time, which might have, helped with Rock not really wanting to take his dad's name. But it was strange over the years. Sometimes they were on, sometimes they were off. But it was over the years. I know that Rocky is extremely proud, that The Rock, became who he is.
I believe, although he may have, had his ups and downs with his dad, he's always been very close with his mother. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, God, yes. Yeah, he's without a doubt. His mother and his grandmother.
So, you guys have him make his debut in the ring at Survivor Series 1996, and it's kind of an interesting place to debut because that's such a critical show in the history of the company. You've got Mankind taking on The Undertaker, and The Undertaker kind of floats down from the ceiling almost in like a bat-like costume. And then you've got Bret Hart making his in-ring return after a long absence from the company, and he's taking on Stone Cold Steve Austin, and this is Stone Cold's first high-profile match like this, a phenomenal match, very underrated. And then the crowd is just on fire for Sid versus Shawn Michaels. They do the title switch. So there's a lot going on. The NWO is really caught on, and the WWF is trying to play catch-up. And in the middle here, it's kind of a hodgepodge match. Let's run through. This is an interesting thing here. The Rock's team for Survivor Series is Jake the Snake Roberts, who is a little bit of a surprise, Wildman Mark Miro, and the Stalker, Barry Windham. And they're taking on Jerry the King Lawler, Hunter Hearst Helmsley, Goldust, and Crush. What an interesting, first of all, the amount of talent on those teams is unbelievable. But what an interesting match, especially kind of in the middle of the card, right?
Yeah, it was one of the Survivor Series. That's when Vince was trying to get away from those Survivor Series tag team matches. So it was like, we'll have one traditional tag team match and one or two, whatever, but it was a way to introduce him. Lawler was in there because he had worked with Lawler in Memphis. We knew we could trust him. Triple H was in there because Triple H was a proven good worker. So you had people in there that would make him shine and make him look good. And then on the other side, I'll tell you another one that was big on The Rock and Rocky Maivia at the time, who was a big supporter, was Jake. And Jake was working with us in the office and in creative at that time too.
And he was sold on him.
Oh God, yes. Yeah. Jake had high hopes for Rocky, and they actually lived in the same apartment building there in Stamford. And Jake had a lot of early influence on The Rock.
Of course, this goes down, as we said, Survivor Series 96. That's November 17th. So it's hard to believe, but it's almost 21 years ago. And this debut actually makes The Rock, or I guess Rocky at the time, the first third-generation wrestler in WWF history. And that's something you guys played off of in a big way. Obviously, from the name on down, the combination of the Polynesian entrance and then, the shuffle. The finish is kind of a shoulder breaker type maneuver. How does that come to be? Do you recall?
I believe that that was Jake's idea, something that would be safe and something that he could do with everybody.
Right.
So that was the reasoning behind it. And, it was, what do we do for a finish? And that was Jake's idea.
It's the traditional Survivor Series elimination match as we laid out. So, of course, it comes down to Rocky in a 2-on-1 situation, taking on both Crush and Goldust. And somehow our new third-generation babyface, the Blue Chipper, as JR called him several times that night, pins both guys. He pins Crush after a flying body press, and then Goldust takes the shoulder breaker for the win. And Rocky is the sole survivor. And I do find it kind of interesting, considering what we're about to break down and what most of you've heard for a long time, that The Rock's debut match in front of a major WWE audience, Triple H is on the other side of the ring. How funny is that?
Well, yeah, and, it's, God, you bring up the Blue Chipper and all that stuff and the vignettes and the hype and everything around it. It was Madison Square Garden, Survivor Series. That what a great just card that was overall. And they just shit all over him. I mean, that crowd just shit all over him.
Cold turkey can be great on sandwiches, but there is a better way to break your bad habits. We're not talking about some weird mind voodoo from your crazy neighbor or some stories from Marty Jannetty. We're talking about our sponsor, Fume. And they look at the problem in a different way. Not everything in a bad habit is wrong. So instead of a drastic, uncomfortable change, why not just remove the bad from your habit? Well, Fume is an innovative, award-nominated device that does just that. Instead of electronics, Fume is completely natural. Instead of vapor, Fume uses flavored air. And instead of harmful chemicals, Fume uses natural, delicious flavors. You get it. Instead of bad, Fume is good. It's a habit you're free to enjoy. And it makes replacing your bad habit easy. Your Fume comes with adjustable airflow dials, and it's designed with movable parts and magnets for fidgeting, giving your fingers a lot to do, which is helpful for de-stressing or anxiety while you're trying to break that habit. And I have to admit, my wife was a little skeptical of this at first, but buddy, she loved the flavor. Way more flavor than she expected. She really enjoyed the crisp mint, but they've got tons of other flavors too, like white cranberry. They got maple pepper. How about sparkling grapefruit, orange, vanilla, raspberry, lemon? So many different flavors for you to choose from. You'll also notice that it feels great. It's well weighted. It's perfectly balanced. It is fun to fidget with. It's also made of beautiful real wood, and it's a shape that, I don't know, you just feel cool using it. Here's the reality. Stopping is something we all put off because it's hard. But switching to Fume, man, it's easy, enjoyable, and even fun. Fume has served over 100,000 customers and has thousands of success stories, and there's no reason that can't be you. Join Fume in accelerating humanity's breakup from destructive habits by picking up the Journey Pack today. Head to tryfume.com and use the code WRESTLE to save 10% when you get the Journey Pack today. That's try FUM and use the code WRESTLE to save an additional 10% off your order today. One more time, tryfume.com/wrestle and use the code WRESTLE to save an additional 10% off your order today.
There's this perception that nobody came to the games, and a lot of the games were doing really, really well ticket sale wise. But at some point, I forget exactly which week, the crowd is not awesome. And Jim Ross opens with the line that's similar to 30,000 were expected, but Mother Nature has flexed her muscles to excuse why there was no crowd there in the weather. When did you know, well, we've jumped the shark?
Well, that was actually accurate. It was, my God, it was like minus 500 degrees, raining, sleeting. It was terrible. The fact that we even had a game was insane. So that was factual. It was, we discussed canceling the game, and how do you cancel an XFL game when you're talking about it's going to be more violent, it's going to be crazier and all this other shit, you know, and you're going to cancel for weather. So that was quickly thrown out, but that was pretty much true. But after but at the same time, yeah, it did drop off dramatically afterwards. The football sucked. And the football did get better as time went on, but it was just too little too late.
There's a report in the book, The Long Bomb, that the XFL sent a press release out saying that their second season would include them featuring players as young as 18 years old. Do you remember there being a conversation about signing kids right out of high school to play football?
No, not anything I was involved in, no. Vince really did want to have a second season.
Yeah, and they skipped that in the show too. It's worth mentioning that even after the NBC pulls out, he thought he could continue it with UPN and planned on going forward. And in the documentary, they skip over that and they just highlight and they kind of shape it that, well, Dick was such good friends with Vince that he convinced him to stop. But the reality is Vince was going to march forward for season 2 until UPN ultimately said, hey, if you do it, then we're going to have to cut back some of the SmackDown. And that forced his hand and he doubled down on wrestling. Is that the way you remember it?
No.
How do you remember it?
I remember it simply as Vince really wanted to do a second season, and he was actually defiant about doing it and being successful in spite of NBC, to basically say, you know what, you should have stuck with me. But there just wasn't any interest elsewhere. It wasn't, I've never heard that we were going to cut back from SmackDown or anything. They would never do that for the number one rated show on their net. Well, we're going to take the number one rated. Think of how silly that sounds. We're going to cut back on the number one rated show on our network if you want to, but we'll do your football that didn't do that well. No, there just wasn't any interest. And people felt that the experiment was okay. It was a fun experiment, but thank you, no. There wasn't any money in it. Cut your losses.
Where do you think it ranks as far as all-time worst television?
Oh, it's pretty high up there.
TV Guide in 2002 put it at number 3. Do you think that's accurate?
That's fair.
Why do you think it's so bad? Why do you think that's fair if you were just saying that the football was decent?
I said the football got decent at the end, but leading up to that, there was so much miscommunication. There was so much different agendas on everybody. Vince wanted to do it one way. Dick wanted to do it another way. The NBC directors directed their way. When Timmy Walbert or WWF directors would come in and try and help out, they would do it Vince's way. And it was a mishmash. There was no consistency. They were constantly trying something else. You talk about jumping the shark. We jumped the shark with the camera in the cheerleaders' dressing room. It was horrible.
Is there a more Vince story than the Honda?
Typical Vince. Yeah,
now let's run through it. A lot of people don't know the story, but the Honda had signed on to be a big sponsor of the XFL. And when the ratings decline starts and it becomes apparent that, this thing is not something we want, Honda pulls their ad order. So the XFL and NBC enjoyed some sponsorship from Honda, but pretty quickly Honda pulls out. And when they do, Vince is none too happy. So he has an idea. Tell everybody what this idea is.
Put a Honda Civic on the 50-yard line and blow it up. But hang on now. It wasn't just that they pulled out. They made some statements about the raunchiness of the league, and they spoke ill of the XFL as to why they were pulling out in the product, which pissed him off. It's one thing to say, hey, we're gonna pull our advertising, and then don't diss the product. So as soon as they did the diss, okay, you want to diss? We'll show you who can diss, pal. We're going to put a car on the 50-yard line and we're going to blow it up. You know, when Vince, the limo that Vince was in that got blown up that time, that was actually a Honda limo.
No, it's not.
Yeah, because he holds a grudge and he said, I want a Honda limo so I can finally blow up my Honda.
You're making that up.
Listen. What's my line? God damn it.
I didn't lie.
Dude. Yeah, I didn't lie. The facts just changed.
The truth changed.
Well, the facts, whatever, truths, whatever. You know what I mean? You know.
So he wants to blow this car up, and Eversol steps in and shuts it down because he does business with Honda for other NBC sports. And he tells Vince that he can't do it. So do you remember what Vince does?
I don't. Refresh my memory.
He has Lawler make a remark after a kicker misses a field goal, and he says, that kicker is as reliable as a Honda. And Honda and NBC were furious. Do you recall any sort of pushback, and did that strain the relationship? I mean, it feels like Vince is fucking with Dick's other money here.
I think the relationship was strained from the minute we went live on that first show, man. It was strained. It was us and them. They hated us. We hated them.
Yeah.
And anybody that wants to paint a rosier picture of something else is just simply not true, because they despised that Vince McMahon and the WWF was fucking with their sacred football. And that these wrestling people were coming in and telling them how to shoot things. We're network television. You're wrestling. And we were like, hey, fuck you. We're the number one show on cable right now. We're drawing these kind of numbers, and we did have the Midas touch at that point.
Was there, it's worth mentioning, before this thing circles the drain, they get the lowest rating for a sports event in prime time in history ever. So people are way done with this.
I bet bowling's gotten worse.
You think that was on network TV?
Yeah. ABC does bowling, don't they?
No.
Sunday? Okay.
No. Let's talk about money. No, you don't want to, but it's time to. When did the boys start to feel like their money was being used to subsidize football?
I don't think they ever really did, because it never was.
Oh, fuck you. Come on.
No, you got to understand, man, we were red hot at that time. Everybody was making good money, and the partnership with NBC was a 50-50 partnership, so it wasn't like we were bankrolling the whole damn thing.
So the guys think that Vince is okay to take these kind of losses and it won't affect their pay at all.
Well, it wasn't affecting their pay. So there was no reason to think that. It wasn't like all of a sudden.
Whoa. This is the wrestling business. There's no reason to think that?
Well, if they were, it wasn't known because they weren't. Their paydays were good. Everybody was making good money at that time. Business was great. You know, there was a time back in the not the Attitude Era, but the new generation era, whatever the hell that was, where coming off of that WBF and all that stuff, where guys' money was affected. But at this time, man, it didn't happen. And he made that very apparent. It's kind of like after that first weekend of games when we all flew back all night long to be in Atlanta for Monday Night Raw, get in at 7 o'clock in the morning, and Michael Hayes drunk trying to light a cigarette on the tarmac, begging Vince to push the production meeting back. And Vince was adamant that he would not push the production meeting back because of the XFL, because he would not allow anyone to ever come back to him and say, you're neglecting the WWF product for the XFL. So we made that was one of the only periods where Vince was actually on time to production meetings, because he was going to prove that the XFL isn't affecting us and it's not going to affect our product.
Did you guys pull The Rock off of shows for him to come introduce that second game? And why do you think that was necessary for The Rock to be the guy there?
I think he was already there doing some stuff in LA.
It was just an easy call to make.
It was easy, and he was the hottest thing going at that time.
Lots of people don't know this story, but there's lots of rumor and innuendo that Vince McMahon, when it was all said and done, lost his ass on the XFL.
Not true.
Set the record straight. Tell us what really happened.
Well, after all said and done, now I'm talking all told, after everything was liquidated and everything sold off and what have you, actually were made a little bit of money, very little, but it was almost a break even, making a little bit of money, but it wasn't a loss, which was kind of a relief more than anything, because the thinking was, man, you made all this investment in this deal, you lost a shitload of money. At the end of the day, after all was said and done, dodged a major bullet.
It's reported that the WWF and NBC lost roughly $70 million on this. And you're saying, which is $35 million each, and you're saying not the case.
After all said and done, no.
What did they sell off that brought in that kind of money?
Well, they just sold off everything, but after all the deals and everything was done, I don't know. I wasn't privy to the thing. I can only tell you what I was told. And after all was said and done, where they came back, they're a public company. You can go back and look and see that at the end of the day, for that time period, that, okay, hey, shit, we didn't take a bath. We actually made a little money.
Late April, Pillman's finally returning, and this time he attacks Austin with a chair to save Bret Hart. And at this point, Bret's a heel, and he's running with Owen and Davey. But immediately after, Pillman realizes he may have overdone it, and it feels like a lot of start and stop with his ankle. Towards the end of April in Omaha, he does a very religious promo saying that everyone should bow their heads, and he holds his hands up and gets down on a knee and starts praying for the complete annihilation and destruction of Austin, and begging that he be stricken down, and that we, the audience, need to open our hearts and let our Savior Bret Hart in. And then he brings out Davey and Owen, and, they pray together, and they say they're supposed to turn the other cheek to Austin, and he puts his butt towards the screen. And
Austin eventually gives chase and says, "Give your soul to the Lord or somebody because your ass is mine." And this is one of the first times, besides Austin 316, that religious stuff had started to be played. Also a first for the WWF.
I did it for 3.5 years.
No, you weren't religious. You were about love.
Okay.
Officially, it's been mentioned that Pillman wasn't a member of the Hart Foundation, just an affiliate, because he wasn't related. Did you guys ever have any sort of conversation about that?
About what?
About that he's not really a member and he's an affiliate?
Yeah, but he was part of the family. Yeah, he was a Calgary guy, dungeon guy. Got his start there.
Meltzer reports around this time that Furnace and LaFawn were originally supposed to be the ones doing the Americans Don't Understand angle that ultimately Brett wound up doing so well, where their heels on one side, faces on the other. Was that originally ever discussed from your recollection about Furnace and LaFawn?
No. Once again, your rumor and innuendo is incorrect. And even with Brett, that was something that wasn't planned. That's something that just happened. And it was a phenomenon that we just went with. That's one of those deals where you get into something and you realize, wow, we got something here. Because we were running shows, obviously, in the United States and in Canada, and we're getting different reactions. So we ran with it. But it wasn't planned ahead of time. Okay, this is what we're going to do, because you read your audience. And that was one of those things that just happened. So once again, that's a situation where your wrestling journalist media tries to make up their own stories and make their what the hell's that word I'm looking for? Help me out.
Narrative
fit the situation.
Cold Day in Hell is a pay-per-view, and Undertaker and Steve Austin are the main event. And after a Stone Cold Stunner on the Undertaker, Pillman hops the guardrail and rang the bell, which caused some chaos. In the confusion, Taker hits the tombstone and steals the victory, which furthers this Austin-Pillman situation. I've always wanted to ask this because I found it odd at the time, and when we're talking about it, I know people like when I say this. Who knows when we'll talk about Cold Day in Hell pay-per-view again? Vince wasn't at this pay-per-view, and I always wanted to know the scoop here. Apparently, someone named Rose passed away the night before. Who is this?
That was his best friend's mom.
Okay. Is this the first pay-per-view you remember Vince not being at?
No.
What other ones would he have missed? Do you recall any of them?
He missed the King of the Ring in Baltimore when he was having his neck surgery. Maybe an In Your House here or there.
Okay. In May, Pillman does a segment on Shotgun Saturday Night. At some point in there, Sunny is talking to Mankind, interviewing Mankind, and she says, "I won't bite." And Pillman immediately quips, "But she will certainly swallow," continuing his edgy loose cannon deal. This has to be a rib. In May, there is a Hart Foundation attack on Bob Holly, and in the melee, Pillman brings a squeegee to the fight. But a rib.
Worked for Sid.
There's a huge build-up to the match. Finally, we're going to get a payoff, man, with this Austin thing. Let's back this up now. This all started in October of 96. We're now in June of 97. And Pillman's doing a lot of promotional work locally because he's finally going to face Austin. And what a big card this will be. The main event is Bret Hart versus Shawn Michaels, the rematch from WrestleMania 12. But now, of course, as you probably remember, Bret can't work the show because he's injured his knee. So they call an audible. So instead of Bret and Shawn and Austin and Pillman, Shawn just wrestles Austin, and they do an interview segment early in the show where Austin attacks Pillman and puts his head in the toilet and flushes it. Is that a Vince idea? Giving a guy a swirly?
Probably. Either that or Austin. Might have even been Brian. I have no idea.
During that match with Shawn, Austin hurts his knee. So the rematch for the next night, which was going to be Pillman Austin, Since it couldn't be on pay-per-view, they said, oh, we'll just make it the Raw main event. Well, now Austin's knee's hurt, so they can't do this big return match that Pillman's been building to, but they still want to put Pillman in the match. So he wrestles Mankind, seemingly out of nowhere. And it's a little bit of a letdown, and he eventually does get his shot at Austin on Raw. But it's a DQ because the Hart Foundation is handcuffed to the ring post. Austin stuns the ref. Owen fishes a key out of the ref's pocket, and somewhere in the melee, Pillman gets his nose busted here. It's actually broken. So, end of June, WWF steals yet another idea from ECW, and Pillman attacks a fan to be written off as the announce team. And I want to ask you about this because he's written off the announce team because they think they have a deal in place for Paul Heyman to agree to participate as a color commentator for Shotgun Saturday Night. What's your recollection of that situation? Because I know you were very involved in Shotgun Saturday Night.
Well, there was speculation to use Paul, but it wasn't ever really a done deal. So Paul had agreed to do it and just then decided he didn't want to do it at the last minute. I think Paul felt that would hurt, and I'm putting words in Paul's mouth. I think would have hurt his credibility with his fan base.
So July is the Canadian Stampede. Oh, by the way, it's worth mentioning, Cornette winds up replacing Pillman on Shotgun Saturday Night. Something pretty fun there. Heyman is replaced by Cornette. July is the Canadian Stampede. Thank you. In Calgary, the Hart Foundation will take on Legion of Doom, Ken Shamrock, Goldust, and Steve Austin. Pillman is the first out for the home team, and the crowd goes banana. Probably the loudest pop of Pillman's career. That August, SummerSlam is sold out in New Jersey, and it's a huge house, and Pillman is wrestling Goldust here. And the deal is, if Pillman loses, he has to wrestle in a dress. And this was a common gimmick match in the South back in the day. So there's like a mannequin there with a dress on it. The SummerSlam match had a botched finish, but of course Pillman loses because we've got to see him in this dress. That same month, Pillman fails a drug test for DECA, and there were rumors at the time that he, as punishment, would be working for free. So we're going to book you on the shows, but not pay you because you failed this drug test. I can't imagine that's the case, Bruce. Shit on that.
I honestly don't remember, but there were times where guys would work in lieu of pay if they flunked drug tests, and that was very few and far between. I don't remember this instance in particular. So
give me an example of somebody in my head that was never been a deal that Vince would have went for.
Okay. Well, I mean, it was. If we had guys for TV and needed them, then it's like, okay, come work, but you're not getting paid. That was part of their.
Give me a name of a guy.
No.
So we're never going to talk money or why we fail or failed drug tests ever?
Well, no, I'm not going to talk about failing drug tests back then when it was a confidential test. No.
Oh.
Then it was a confidential test. So.
Pillman lays out a challenge for the next pay-per-view, which is in September, which will be In Your House Ground Zero. And he says if he can't beat Goldust, he will retire forever. And if Pillman wins, he gets Marlena for 30 days. Goldust says no. And then Pillman pushes the issue and says that Goldust's daughter, Dakota, is really Brian Pillman's daughter. Marlena is then pushed and accepts for Goldust. And Goldust is kind of confused, like, why would you do this? But it comes out here in storyline, and it's revealed to the audience at home that in real life, Brian Pillman had dated Marlena before Goldust met her back when they were all in WCW. And the storyline is Pillman dumped Marlena, and Dustin was the rebound. And Dustin has said since this was a sore spot with him in real life at the time, but business is business. Do you remember this being an issue? I know that it was an issue once upon a time, supposedly, with Dusty and Dustin, because Terry did makeup for WCW and had apparently, hung out with some of the guys, and Dusty didn't look
at that very favorably, but Dustin didn't care and loved her anyway. So do you remember this being any sort of a heat issue at all in real life backstage?
It was, it was probably uncomfortable for Dustin and for Terry, but it was real life. Everybody was on board, and it was a story, and it was something, again, that everybody can relate to. I think that people in general can relate to relationships that go awry. So having to work with and be involved in that was something that people could definitely relate to. So everybody was professional about doing it. It wasn't that big of a deal. We made it a big deal. We made it, again, it was blurring the lines of fantasy and reality.
Marlena tries to help Goldust and has a purse with a brick in it, but Pillman gets it and uses it for the win before dragging Marlena back to his car with him. And looking back, you could see where some of the seeds, or so it would seem, were being planted for her to turn heel at the end, like this was her plan all along. Do you remember what the payoff was supposed to be for this? Was that supposed to be the big revelation?
I believe so. I believe, the idea was for her to turn heel for a while and then end up going back to Goldust. And unfortunately, with what did happen in real life, it's one of those situations where you kind of get a black hole and you lose sight of everything, I guess. So I couldn't go back and tell you, oh, well, this is what we had planned. I think that was the idea, that Marlena would be with Brian and then go back to Dustin at the end.
So the WWF starts running what they call the Pillman Triple X Files, and it's just videos on Raw to show Goldust that Pillman is in a hotel room with his wife, making crude jokes and references in the video, of course. She's coming to the ring with Pillman at this time wearing all black and a nose ring, eventually even a dog collar.
So Bruce is on vacation, and I can only hope that means he's putting some miles on that Peter meat, thanks to Blue Chew. Let's talk about sex, boys and girls. Remember the days when you were always ready to go? Well, now you can be again thanks to Blue Chew. Blue Chew is a unique online service that delivers the same active ingredients as Viagra, Cialis, and Levitra, but in chewable form and at a fraction of the cost. Take these dudes anytime, day or night. So you can plan ahead or be ready whenever an opportunity arises. Roll Tide. And then the process is simple, y'all. You sign up at BlueChew.com, you consult with one of their licensed medical providers, and once you're approved, you'll receive your prescription within days. And here's the best part, it's all done online. That means no visits to the doctor's office, no awkward conversation, no waiting in line at the pharmacy. Blue Chew's tablets are made in the USA, prepared and shipped directly to your door, all in a discreet package. Blue Chew wants to help you have better sex. Discover your options at BlueChew.com. Chew it and do it. And boy, do we have a special deal for our listeners. Try Blue Chew free when you use our promo code WRESTLE at checkout. Just pay $5 shipping. That's BlueChew.com. The promo code is WRESTLE, and you'll receive your first month free. Visit BlueChew.com for more details and important safety information. And we thank Blue Chew for sponsoring today's podcast. And Bruce's Ding Dong.
So obviously the angle here, as we mentioned, is going to be bringing him in to be the GM of Raw. But was there ever any consideration to bringing Eric in for anything beyond on-camera talent? He had been wow, just immediate.
No.
Nobody ever said, let's put him on the creative team or let's find an office position for him. Never.
Nope.
Why was it?
It was let's bring him in as a talent. Let's see how he does. Let's get to know him and find out what's there. He had a lot of baggage. So, I mean, unequivocally, that was ruled out, and that was made clear to Eric. It was also made clear to us that he's coming in as a talent only. He has no creative say-so in anything. He will be an on-air talent, and that's it.
Let me ask you, when you say he had a lot of baggage, I'm going to need you to give me some more detail there.
Well, people looked at Eric as the guy that tried to put us out of business. And Eric was the one that was leading the charge on the WCW side, kicked our ass for a long time, and was viewed as the enemy.
Hang on. Johnny Ace is with the company here. He was on the WCW side.
Yeah. Johnny Ace wasn't the one making the decisions to do all that. Johnny Ace wasn't with the company when they were kicking our ass. Johnny Ace didn't make those personal statements about wanting to put Vince out of business and put the company out of business.
I guess here's what I don't understand. If it was business and everybody understands that it's business and everybody can say that we would have done it too, how is he this scum of the earth?
Because you're talking about the boys. You're talking about human beings here. We can, after the fact, you can look at it and say it's business, and you can get over that shit. People do it every single day. But there were still people that just held a grudge. There were people that had been fired by Eric that were working in the company that were like, fuck him. I don't want to work with him.
Well, no, I get that. But I guess what I don't understand is there's people in the company who have been fired by Stephanie and have been fired by Vince and have been fired by Jim Ross and Johnny Ace, and they're all still there. Did the company not see any? I mean, basically what you're saying is the company saw no significant value in Eric's ability to contribute behind the scenes.
No, what I'm saying is that there was no interest to bring him in any role other than a talent role. To bring him in, nobody knew him from our point of view. I didn't know Eric. Vince didn't know Eric. Stephanie didn't know Eric. JR had worked with him, didn't have a necessarily positive view of him. Other than that, there weren't a lot of people that had a lot of dealings with Eric from that side. The ones that did had a negative viewpoint of him, and most of them were wrestlers and people that had worked for Eric and had a negative experience. So to protect Eric as well, you bring him in as a talent, you put him on the same level as everybody else, and you let him ease his way in versus, oh, God, Eric Bischoff's in charge. Ooh, what the fuck? Is this going to be another their viewpoint of what it was at WCW? It was just simply to protect him and to say, you know what? We don't even want to discuss that yet. Let's bring you in here. Let's see what we got. See if it works out. See if you like us, if we like you, and then we'll go move on from there.
So, Freddie Prinze Jr. could contribute more behind the scenes than Eric Bischoff. Just want to be clear.
It's not what I said.
Okay, because that's what I heard. Do you think Eric enjoyed being on camera better? I say that because I know that you personally have enjoyed producing TV a great deal. But in our private time, you've told me it's a lot less stressful and there's probably a better quality of life on show day, just being talent, right?
And I can tell you for a fact from Eric to me that yes, he did enjoy being a talent, not having the pressure of having to worry about all the other BS.
Yeah. I mean, cause when you're a talent, you show up, you do your gig and you're out of there. But when you're the office, that's not something you can put on and take off. It's 24/7, at least up there. Right.
Oh yeah, everywhere. And it's just it's a huge weight off your shoulders. All you have to do is worry about your performance, and that's it.
I've always been fascinated by this tidbit. Bischoff wrote in his book that after he talked to Vince, Stephanie called. She said, quote, "Eric, I want you to know you've got a lot of heat with a lot of the boys. I'm not sure if you know what you're getting into." Did you know she was making this call, and was it a company decision to kind of give him the heads up that this is something he's going to have to deal with?
That's I'll call it a McMahonism, but Vince always liked to hit you with shit like that.
Keep you on your toes.
Well, it's just letting you know, pal, you got a lot of heat there you got to overcome. And this was probably Stephanie's way of giving that message and to let him know that, hey, a lot of people hate you here. You're coming in. This isn't WCW, and you sure you really want to do this?
So let's talk about that for a minute. His TV debut was on Raw on July 15th, 2002. Vince called in May, so they've kind of been sitting on this for a little while. And this is much different from the way the call went a year prior, where it's a few days' notice. We've got months here. In between the call, where it's Vince, kind of working things out, and then Stephanie giving a heads up, were you guys writing alternate storylines and ideas to nail down the best way to bring him in, or had you always kind of envisioned the big hug scenario that we saw?
Well, we had the scenario of Vince basically endorsing him and bringing him in, but not everybody knew. Not everybody knew who it was going to be. So we were writing scenarios, and you had to be careful when there were other people in the room and stuff like that. So it's like, okay, the new GM will do this.
So who knew and who didn't know? I asked because I always thought this was a huge surprise that it was even hid from the boys, but Stephanie clearly knew because she gave him the heads up. We know Vince knew because he called. Nash called, so he knew. Who else knew? The head writers being Koski, and who else?
No, I don't even know if Koski knew. He might have known. But it was Brian Gewirtz, Michael, Heyman knew, I knew.
What did Hayes think about Bischoff coming in?
Michael was professional, but he wasn't happy about it. He had his own past with Eric. Eric had fired him. And I don't think Michael was happy about working with Eric again. He had a bad experience. And Dave.
Does Vince kind of ask anyone else's opinion before making this deal? You talked about on the last Nitro where he kind of polled the office before they did the purchase of WCW. Did something like that happen here?
Sure, he got everybody's opinion and their input on it. The funny thing was people that didn't even know Eric, had an opinion on it based on
rumor and innuendo,
rumor and innuendo and shit. And I can speak for myself. I didn't know Eric. I know that I took a lot of the shit that he did very personally, and it affected my family. It affected me, and I, had that wall up. But at the same time, I tried to view it as, I don't know him. He's out there surviving. He's trying to do what he thinks best for the company over there, and he's taking care of his family. So I was like, you know what? Again, it's business. I could look back now because we were the winners. We're sitting in a good spot now. I can have that viewpoint of, you know what? He's trying to make a living. Come on in and let's see if we can do some business. So I didn't harbor any ill will. I didn't know Eric Bischoff other than meeting him one time in my life, and was willing to say, okay, man, yeah, let's make this work.
Do you remember anybody else being against it besides Michael Hayes?
Heyman was against it. Heyman didn't like it. He didn't feel that Eric would add anything to it. But at the same time, he was one of the ones that pitched, Eric earlier. So that was a weird dynamic. They weren't. Yeah, Heyman wasn't really necessarily overjoyed with it, but again, that was somebody that had worked with Eric before. Didn't have a good experience.
So on July 15th, Vince announces on Raw that the beginning of a new era is here for the WWE, and he's going to hire 2 general managers, one to run each of the flagship shows, both Raw and SmackDown. So we have our brand split. The Raw general manager is announced, and to the shock of everyone at home, it's Eric Bischoff. What was the reaction from the crowd, and is it the one you guys expected?
We expected shock, and we got shock. We got a holy shit moment. I don't think that anyone expected that, and it was the reaction that we wanted.
What was that day like for Eric? Did you guys hide him away in a bus somewhere to not spoil the surprise?
Yeah, it was long before buses. No, Eric was picked up and taken away to a separate hotel and picked up in a stretch limo. Got there to the building probably 40 minutes before he was to go out. Stephanie went out and met with him in the limo. He had his verbiage and everything that day. The limo driver brought it over to him that day, so he kind of knew what he was doing. And Stephanie went out and met with him. I don't think Vince even went out and met with him.
So were you present when Vince and Eric met for the first time, or did that happen on camera in front of everybody?
That happened. No, that happened backstage real quickly, right before they went out.
So in Gorilla?
Yes.
So you're in Gorilla, right?
Well, I went and we went and got him, introduced. Hey, how you doing? Because we went right from the limo, right inside to get him up to Gorilla for the deal with Booker T, where he walked by Booker T and we did the quick reveal, that holy shit moment for TV. So I met him then, and I took him up to Vince.
What was the meeting like the first time Vince and Eric were together?
Hey, pal, how you doing? All right, you ready to go? Let's go have some fun. That was it. They went out there and did it.
Did you have a conversation with Vince after the fact? What was Vince's impression of meeting Eric for the first time?
Didn't really talk about it, man. We just went right from there, and I took him back, and I had all the pre-tapes with him. I actually want pre-tapes, and we're all live that night. So we had a busy night.
What about?
So I just took him right from there, walked him through all the boys, and somebody yelled as he went through the backstage set, "Where's his bag? Find his bag!" Shit like that. Just kind of.
Do you know who yelled that?
Yes.
Who was it?
People. Actually, a lot of, a few of them did.
Well, nobody shit in his bag that night, I don't think, did they?
No, he didn't have a bag.
Okay. So why don't you just tell us who yelled?
Seriously, there were it was almost like a fucking chant.
Yeah, people were really
funny.
I got it.
Yeah.
Everybody has a story about the first time they met Vince McMahon. Did you ever hear Bischoff's account of what it was like to finally meet Vince after all this time?
No, not really. I think it was more after the fact. I was standing with Eric at the end of the night, and we were done. And he says, because I've heard so much about the guy. And we were standing outside in the loading dock, and Vince and Stephanie and Linda and Shane were all getting into the car, getting ready to go home. And he says, he goes, I guess you can tell a lot about a man by the way that he is with his family. And he goes, I guess Vince isn't that bad after all. And he says, we're going to have some fun. And I just remember that moment because it was such a crazy fucking night.
Yeah.
And we were like all over the place. But I was the one that was basically anointed to work with Eric because I had no prior baggage with him. I never worked with him before. And I didn't care. You know what I mean? It was like, okay, yeah,
I'll do it.
We're here. We won. I'll do it. I don't give a shit. And
well, what was your impression of Eric after everything you had heard? How did he compare to what you had heard about Eric Bischoff?
He was obviously on his best behavior. He was nice as could be and very professional and did everything we asked him to do. Nailed it all. It was all live. We didn't have a whole lot of time to rehearse or go over shit. There were people that he knew from his stint at WCW and people he was meeting for the first time. So I think it was overwhelming for him that first night coming in, and we just hit him with a barrage of stuff, and I was just, bam, hitting him one right after the other.
We're going to run through the list of names of people he may have had an issue with, but do you remember that particular night? Did he have any fun reunions with guys he hadn't seen in a long time, or any awkward or uncomfortable moments that you recall seeing or hearing about?
No, and I was with him for pretty much from the moment he walked into the building until he left that night. So there were no awkward moments at all with anybody. And there were guys that came over and said hello, and for the most part, it was all open arms and welcoming him to the company. Everybody was professional and nice.
Bischoff wrote in his book that his promo that night was totally scripted. Who would have been in charge with writing Bischoff's promo there?
Brian Gewirtz.
Eric wrote in his book, I walked to the center of the stage and gave Vince a big hug, a very, very big hug. We milked it to the point where it was almost homoerotic. What must this have sounded like when Vince pitched this to Eric?
I don't think Vince did pitch it to Eric. I think that was just kind of an impromptu hug. It wasn't like a, God damn, pal, let's get out there and hug. Now, when we hug, we got to rub titties. It's going to be like vanilla titty on titty. And then grab my ass. I mean, grab it, pal. Yeah, it just kind of happened. It was impromptu.
So the next night, Stephanie is announced as the new GM of SmackDown, and it's official. The brands are split. Bruce, was the goal here to try to simulate the Monday Night Wars a little bit with McMahon running one show and Bischoff running the other?
Yeah, I mean, you know, the original whole scenario was simply the McMahon versus McMahon, but yeah, essentially it was kind of to simulate the Monday Night Wars competition, you know, one brand versus the other.
Bringing in Bischoff was a total surprise, but the following week's ratings were pretty good, according to Meltzer. He said last week's show with Eric Bischoff was a definite success, doing 4.2 rating off hours of 4.1 and 4.5. The show opened at a 3.7, which is higher than usual, and a sign that the previous week's episode, which was Bischoff's debut, got people talking. The next week, Dave would even follow up with, all the shows since Bischoff came back have been good and well received. Do you remember Vince being pleased with the ratings and the way the angle's coming off on TV?
Yeah, I think we all were, because we'd built up to it so much. This whole brand split and who the GMs were going to be. I will say this, that amongst us, there was a bit of a higher power kind of deflation on the SmackDown brand with Stephanie. We all wanted two new. If we could have had two Bischoffs, I don't know who that could have been, but if we could have had that at that time, that would have been ideal.
What about Paul Heyman?
Heyman was already there, so you wanted something wouldn't have had
new.
as much impact.
Yeah.
Right. We wanted both of them to be new and impactful.
Pardon the pun. Meltzer also had this warning. There may be forces behind the scenes working to screw over Eric Bischoff already. Some feel the only reason Vince brought him in was to humiliate him in the end. Can you respond to that allegation? And to be clear, that's not Meltzer saying that it was Vince's intention, but he is saying that there are some within the company who felt that way and indicated that to him. Did you ever remember any sort of rumblings amongst the office or the boys that the only reason he signed him is to embarrass his ass?
Oh, I think there's a lot of people in the rumor and innuendo department that would go with the conspiracy theory that, you know, the only reason he's bringing him in is to bring him down. But no, that wasn't a fact, and it simply just wasn't true. He was bringing him in to help the ratings and to do something with him. And if we could use him to better the brand, then he was going to do that.
All right. By now you guys know that once upon a time, I hurt my knee in football, never really got it fixed. And well, it's just gotten worse and worse. And some days are better than others, but there's some days where, man, it's just hard to get that rascal going. That's when I found topical CBD, specifically the amazing kind. And I've started using it and I can tell a difference. I really, really recommend you try it out. If you've got a problem with a shoulder or a hip or an elbow, mine's in my knee, and I'm telling you, it works. The Amazing Kind is a family-run business specializing in plant-based pain relief and wellness support for both mood and sleep. You'll find that their products are of the highest quality and sourced from GMP certified manufacturers. In fact, their products are all tested for quality and purity to make sure that what you're buying is of the highest quality and is exactly what it says it is on the label. Now, the Amazing Kind, they offer a wide range of high-quality topicals, infused oils, and soft gels, including CBD, CBG, and CBN. Now, the Amazing Kind CBD topicals are easy to apply and can be used as needed. That makes them so convenient for on-the-go relief. And that's what I've started doing. I keep some at the house, I keep some at the office. I highly recommend it. If you've got some localized pain, these topicals can be applied directly to the area that's giving you some pain or some discomfort. Maybe it's not a joint like me. Maybe you got some sore muscles. Maybe you have a specific skin condition. They can help alleviate pain and inflammation in the target area. These topicals are like creams and lotions and balms and oils, all infused with CBD, but there's so many other benefits, even anti-inflammatory. You see, CBD has been shown as a potential anti-inflammatory agent, and when it's applied topically, it can reduce the inflammation. That'll even help you with really serious things like arthritis or dermatitis, or maybe just general skin irritation. How about muscle recovery? If you've been pushing it too hard and maybe you're sore, why not use a CBD topical to aid in that muscle recovery? If you're doing a post-workout soreness, or Maybe you just got some neck tension. I'm telling you, my wife and I were sold on the Amazing Kind. You can also use it for skin health to help for things like acne and psoriasis and eczema, even dry skin. Some people have even said that it improves their skin texture and reduces some redness. But the chronic pain conditions, that's what I'm talking about. Even things like fibromyalgia and neuropathy, those folks can still find help with a CBD topical on the affected area. I've never been suffering from migraines, but I've got somebody I work with who's really close in my life, and they tell me that CBD topicals even help them with their migraines. So think of the Amazing Kind for that. It also just helps you relax. Maybe if you're trying to get a massage and you want to just rub this stuff in, why not? The Amazing Kind is a plant-based topical product for relief from all your aches and pains that are associated with exercise, physical activity, sore muscles, sore joints, inflammation, and arthritis. And you can buy it right now and get 10% off all your orders with the promo code WRESTLE at theamazingkind.com. That's theamazingkind.com, and use our promo code WRESTLE. You'll save 10% off at theamazingkind.com.
Now, the tag team we're talking about today, of course, most remember as Axe and Smash, and there were other members that we'll get into than the traditional two that most are familiar with. But the debut actually went down before you were there, Bruce. It was January of 1987. We're going to touch on that briefly. Most of us remember Smash as Barry Darsow, but he was formerly in the Jim Crockett Promotions and working lots of independents doing a Russian gimmick as Crusher Khrushchev. So he's appearing all over in the NWA doing that character. And some of our younger fans may remember him as Repo Man and Blacktop Bully. Neither one of those were nearly as successful as Crusher Khrushchev and Smash. But when Smash was originally debuted, it wasn't Barry Darsow. Who was it?
It was a gentleman by the name of Randy Colley, who most people will probably remember as Moondog Rex.
And Moondog Rex is one half of the Moondogs tag team. And for those younger listeners who aren't familiar with the Moondogs, can you describe their gimmick or tell us some of their favorite memories or matches, or what can you share with us about the Moondogs?
Well, the Moondogs were a unique combination of guys. They both had bleach blonde, almost white hair. And I don't really know how you could classify the gimmick, but they both wore jeans that were kind of cut off with rope for belts, and they chewed on giant bones. So they were Moondogs. The original Moondog, Lonnie Main, I guess they were kind of a takeoff on Moondog Main way back in the day. But they were very colorful. You had Moondog Spot, who was Sailor White Thomas, and Moondog Rex, who was Randy Colley, and there was another Moondog out there from time to time as well.
So let's talk a little bit about how that comes about, because there's lots of rumor and innuendo that Demolition is actually Randy Colley's idea. And I think Bill Eadie is the guy who's kind of put this out there. And then, of course, I know they debuted a little while before you joined, but what do you remember about whose idea this Demolition concept was? Was it Randy Colley's? Was it Vince McMahon's? Who deserves the credit for this, to the best of your knowledge?
Well, obviously, as you stated several times, I wasn't there when it came out, but I do know from talking to Randy Colley, because I remember Randy way back from his Nightmare days in the Mid-South Wrestling, and I've always heard that it was Randy Colley's idea, that Randy approached Vince with this idea of a tag team with the masks and the makeup, and they put he and Bill Eadie together. So from my best recollection, the original idea, or the germ of the idea, was Randy Colley's.
So how would you best describe in a few words what the Demolition gimmick is? And a lot of people are going to hear me ask that and say, oh, it was a Road Warrior ripoff. But it was a little different. But it was certainly after the Road Warriors. And we'll address the Road Warrior thing in a minute. But first, how would you describe it?
I think if you were going to describe Demolition, they were just two big, tough guys that kind of demolished all of their opponents, and they were rough and tough, and a very rugged tag team. I think that's the best way to describe them.
Catch me up a little bit about
and I'm fascinated by this because I didn't see it until later. Obviously, I was a kid, but they kind of look a little bit like,
S&M character?
Yeah. So where does that come about? Do you remember that kind of being the talk in the back amongst the boys? As a kid, of course, I didn't know what the hell that was, but now that I know who Jim Cornette is, I know exactly what S&M is.
What the hell?
It was a joke. These are jokes. We tell jokes on the show.
Yes, folks. It's that's the part where you go, ha ha, and then you tweet Jim Cornette, and then I get the phone call. But Demolition and the whole outlook, yeah, a little bit dominatrix-ish if you're into that sort of thing. But I think there was also kind of a play on Jason from the Friday the 13th movies as well that was playing in there as well. They were trying to go for.
So let's talk about that because that is part of their iconic outfit is the mask. With, I guess it's a piece of leather affixed to the back. And I guess, as far as you understand, were the original masks spray painted or were they covered with leather?
That's a damn good question. I think that they were always kind of had the leather front on them, the ones that I ever saw up close. I think they were always leather. That's my recollection.
I felt like at one point I have seen some of the paint coming off, but that may have been when they added somebody like, Hacksaw for a one-off or something when he would paint his face. But essentially, it is just a hockey mask that you guys kind of gimmicked up with leather and studs and stuff. When you were there, was that something that the costume department was putting together, or in '87 did that really exist? Were the guys coming up with it on their own?
At that point, it was possibly could have been something creative department came up with, but the guys were responsible for getting all of that stuff made and maintaining it. So they probably would have been responsible for that themselves. The talent would have been.
All right, so let's move away from the costume for a minute. I'm sure we'll come back eventually here. After a few appearances together, Edie has went on record as saying that too many people recognize Khali from being one of the Moondogs, so they decided to replace him. And Edie says the WWF suggested 4 other guys who were currently working in the WWF at the time to replace Khali, but Edie didn't think it would work because he felt the fans would recognize those guys as other WWF performers, similar to the way they had the Moondogs. And it wasn't too long before this that Barry Darsow had reached out and contacted the WWF once his NWA contract had expired. And when Vince suggests Darsow, Edie drives down to Charlotte, his old stomping grounds, to meet Darsow. And from there, the Demolition we all know was born. So that's Edie's testimony. Is that the way you remember it going down?
That's the way that I heard it went down, yes. And I've heard directly from Vince that it was simply too much with people when they did Randy Khali under the Demolition face paint and so on and so forth, that the crowds, especially in the Northeast, were chanting Moondog, Moondog every time that Randy got into the ring. And Vince just didn't feel that was going to work and decided they needed to get someone else.
So I'm curious, you know what's coming here. If it's Randy's idea and the WWF and Demolition made a mint with this, or I guess Edie and Darsow did, do you know, did Khali ever receive any sort of compensation to the best of your understanding for coming up with this iconic gimmick that everybody made money from except him?
Probably not, but again, when you talk about guys coming up with ideas, people come up with ideas all the time and other people use them. And Vince is notorious for that someone may give him an idea and he'll use it for someone else. And that's one of the first things that he'll tell you when you talk to him, and especially if you're talking about creative and say, hey, Vince, I've got an idea. He'll say, hey, I really like that. I don't see it for you, but I see it for someone else. And he'll use it for somebody else.
Do you think
that's just the creative world? That happens every day in Hollywood, television, music. That's the way it works.
Do you think that is fair, or, life's not fair, pal?
Life's not fair. And you can go through a singer at a country fair doing an original song, and Steven Tyler listens to it and picks up on it. He makes it famous. Is that fair? He's the one that made it famous. So that's just the creative game and how it goes sometimes. You may hear an idea or someone will say something to somebody else 6 times removed. By the time it gets to you, it may have been someone else's original idea. But you've heard me say a million times, somebody will say something, I go, I'm stealing that.
Yeah.
I'm making my own.
Well, yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I just wondered, especially since there's been a recent controversy, and I'm not trying to take too much of a sidetrack here, with the whole broken gimmick and the Jarrett situation and the WWE and the Hardys and, you know, who owns it. And the contention there is more of always a music analogy of the publisher is the person who owns the rights. So in this case, you would agree that it's Vince's company. The idea happened when it was under Vince's watch. So one way or another, Vince owns Demolition, not Collie or Edie or anybody else.
Yeah, I think that's the way that most people see it.
So let's get into some background on both guys. We've said his name a few times. Axe was Bill Edie, and he was said that he got into the business, you know, kind of by accident. He was home for summer break from college one year. His neighbor was one of the athletic commissioners in Pennsylvania. And he invited Bill to go to the Pittsburgh Civic Center just to see a wrestling show. When he went, he got to go into the locker room and meet a lot of the guys. And the promoter that night asked if he'd ever thought about getting into wrestling because he was a big guy. So a few weeks later, he starts training with Larry Zbyszko to become a professional wrestler. And then after his wrestling career, he went on to become a teacher, and he would teach in Ohio. And before Edie became Axe, you may remember him, some of our older listeners, as the Masked Superstar. And he wrestled as the Super Machine for a little bit in the WWF, Bolo Mongol, and he did, you know, kind of a rip-off indie gimmick of Demolition. But Demolition is certainly, and I know a lot of older fans are going to disagree with this because they're marks for the Masked Superstar, but Demolition is his most iconic run in the business. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, I think that probably for this generation it's going to be Demolition. To me, he was always the Masked Superstar. And to me, the Masked Superstar gimmick was such a strong gimmick, and it was the first time that I met Bill and actually got to be around him, and I thought he was an incredible performer. So, you know, I think that he's been successful from the Mongols to the Masked Superstar on to Demolition, or all three pretty damn good gimmicks.
Barry Darsow grew up in Minnesota, and this is something we've talked about a lot on the show here. For whatever reason, Minnesota was a hotbed for wrestling during this point. He grows up as friends with the Road Warriors, Mr. Perfect, Wayne Bloom, Brady Boone, Nikita Koloff, John Nord, and Tony Schiavone's favorite wrestler, Tom Zink. They all start working out at the gym together, and they're bouncers at a bar that a lot of wrestling fans have heard about, Grandma B's. One day at Grandma B's, Darsow meets Eddie Sharkey, who we've talked about on the Kurt Hennig and Rick Rude shows, available now in the archives. Sharkey sees how big these guys are and recruits them all to become wrestlers. And Sharkey had rented out a church basement, and that's where they have a wrestling ring with a homemade ring and wooden beams. And then one day, Ole Anderson comes to take a look at them, and he took Animal, who was their first guy in the group to get in the business, and then Darsow would get in after that. So as the Masked Superstar, who you mentioned a minute ago, we should mention that Bill Edie is one of the first guys to body slam Andre the Giant. There's all the rumor and innuendo out there, the WWE narrative, that didn't happen before WrestleMania 3, but that's of course not true. Harley Race and Bill Edie and a few others did as well. And Edie had significant success in Georgia, winning their heavyweight title 4 times, and eventually the NWA National Heavyweight title. He had a run in the WWF prior to Demolition as the Masked Superstar for 83 and 84. We mentioned it a minute ago. You would see him have matches with Hulk Hogan, Bob Backlund, Jimmy Snuka, Sergeant Slaughter, all the major players. And then in 86, he became one of the Machines, which is kind of a fun thing they did in 86. You would see Blackjack as Big Machine, Andre the Giant as Giant Machine, and Edie was Super Machine. And they had a brief run against the Heenan family there. And that causes, you know, when that run kind of dies down, Edie leaves and becomes the Masked Superstar in Florida. And he had a brief run there where he beat Lex Luger for the Southern title and then just dropped it back a couple weeks after. Meanwhile, Darsow is starting his career in Hawaii and New Zealand, and then on to the NWA. He's bouncing around as part of this Russian group with Ivan and Nikita Koloff,
and they had a hot feud with the Road Warriors and the Rock and Roll Express in the NWA, and even a tag title run there. He even went to win the Mid-Atlantic title at some point before his run winds up coming to an end in December of '86. So Edie and Darso, in their incarnation as Demolition, now that Colley's out, debut on February 8th on the Wrestling Challenge against S.D. Jones and Don Driggers. We haven't talked a lot about S.D. Jones here on the show before. Do you got any S.D. Jones stories you can share?
Special delivery, S.D. Jones. S.D. was one of those guys who was from the Dominican Republic, and he was a great enhancement talent and just was missing that one little extra it factor to break on through to the other side, if you will. Great hand, great guy, dependable, but he was just missing it, in my opinion. But you talk about Bill Eadie and being before the Demolition and stuff. One of his runs as Mass Superstar was through the Mid-South area, and that was during the 3-week run that Terry Taylor had as a booker in Mid-South. I don't know how long he was there. 3 weeks was probably too long. But one of the all-time worst territory town-killing finishes that ever took place in the Houston ring was done with Bill Eadie, Dick Murdoch, and Ted DiBiase and Dr. Death, where the finish of the match was to unmask the Masked Superstar. And Eadie was on his way out. Murdoch was on his way out. Murdoch hated Terry Taylor. Eadie quit because of Terry Taylor. And this was their last night in the territory. So they do a finish where you're supposed to unmask the guy. And everybody, when you have that finish, the audience is there to see the masked guy get unmasked and to see his face. So they do the finish. The heels go to the back into the dressing room. Eadie still with his mask. Eadie walks in the dressing room. DiBiase and Doc act like they're beating the door down. And Eadie tosses Ted a mask. Ted goes back out to the ring and holds the mask up. People never got to see Bill's face. But worse than that, Eadie worked in a black mask and threw a red mask out to Ted for Ted to go back out like he unmasked him. He's got a red mask. Which is just a bullshit finish, and one of the reasons that probably Terry didn't last that long as far as being a booker in the business.
Well, so there you go. There's a little bit of, and I didn't even know all that, so that's a little bit of history lesson for us who maybe were more familiar with Eadie as a Demolition member. I feel like sooner or later we're just going to have to talk about it. In your opinion, and I know you've talked about this a lot on the show in the past, but some people are probably listening to this episode first. You've always been of the belief that Demolition is not a ripoff of the Road Warriors. Sell us on that. A lot of people are just of the opinion that Vince tried to sign the Road Warriors, and I guess I should ask that first. Do you know for sure that the Road Warriors received an offer and had a conversation and had a meeting with Vince at his house for a deal before Demolition debuted?
I don't know because I wasn't there. I'd always heard that Vince was interested in the Road Warriors. And what's his name? Colley had this idea for Demolition, and Vince went with Demolition. I also remember a meeting after I got there with the Road Warriors and Vince. And I don't even know if they met in person or not, but I do remember getting the phone call and being with Vince where he said, we're going full steam ahead with Demolition and Powers of Pain. Because the Road Warriors decided that they were not going to come in. And I want to say that was sometime late 1987, early 1988.
In your opinion, had Demolition, had the Road Warriors come in, would Demolition have essentially become cannon fodder for the Road Warriors? Would they have existed? Were they created to just be an opponent for an eventual feud with the Road Warriors, but when they didn't sign, Vince just kind of went the other way with it?
Well, I definitely think that they would have had a program, but I think that they were different enough and the Road Warriors at the time had just that cult following, and they had a huge babyface following. Demolition were heels, and they were classic heels, especially in the WWF. And people, I didn't believe this, I didn't know it until you're there, and you really don't get it. People were either NWA and Crockett fans, or they were WWF fans. WWF fans, everything WWF was the greatest of all time. And NWA was a subpar regional promotion. NWA fans were the NWA was real wrestling, where real wrestlers are, and this is the best matches, and the WWF was New York Hollywood crap. So you really had two strong beliefs, and I just think that WWF audience would have accepted them as two different teams, not looking at them as similar.
As far as a conversation with Vince, do you recall any conversation with him about any sort of correlation between the two gimmicks?
No, not really, ever. Now, obviously, there were a lot of comparisons with Powers of Pain. Yes.
Let's hear what that sounds like.
Well, it's just you look at the Powers of Pain and you look at the Road Warriors. They looked alike. They were both big bodybuilder teams. Demolition, neither one of those guys were bodybuilders. They didn't have that big look, and they were more of a working team, whereas the Road Warriors and Powers of Pain were more of a kicking and stomping and punching team. It wasn't that there were differences, and big enough differences that I didn't compare them. I mean, I really didn't. I see where people do because of the face paint.
Well, and the spikes, and I realize that the spikes are certainly different. You know, and one wears shoulder pads and one doesn't. But the black leather, the spikes, the face paint, I could see how a lot of people would make that correlation.
And I can see how people would make that correlation as well. Then the bell rang.
Eventually, Russo meets with McMahon and explains that he's missing time with his family, and that his wife now is positioning herself as a single parent. So she wants to move closer to her family, and Vince is basically here asking for permission to move, and is trying to sell McMahon on the fact that he'll still be on the road with him 3 days a week and fly up to Stamford whenever needed. McMahon says, "Vince, I don't know what the problem is. You make enough money now. Why don't you just hire a nanny?" That was it. All those times I was wondering if Vince truly cared about me, I was just giving my answer. With such a cold, callous response, I knew he didn't give a shit about Vince Russo or his family. All he cared about was his ratings, his money, and his company. I was crushed. Bruce, this nanny line has become somewhat famous. When did you first hear it, and what was your reaction?
I never heard the nanny line until many, many, many years after the fact, when Russo started quoting it publicly. But it doesn't surprise me. That sounds like something that Vince McMahon would say.
What?
And I could see him delivering it in a very cold, very cold way.
What did you know about this script idea for rope opera? That never came to be. What do you remember about that, if anything?
I never heard of it, but I guess since he kept that on his own and he did all that on his own, it's something that's very popular and really doing well right now.
Goodness, look at you.
Well, no, I'm asking because he said that he kept it away from Vince McMahon and that he was going to do it on his own, and it was this great deal, but I have no idea what happened to it.
So Russo said if it was about money, let's make it about money. He told McMahon he wanted to get out of the business when he turned 40, and that was in 15 months. So he asked for $1 million for those 15 months, and then he's done. Russo wrote, "As much as he always protects his hand, Vince couldn't this time. His facial expression dropped his cards all over the table. He was shocked. Well, that's an awful lot of money," he said. "Is it, Vince?" I answered. "You think I don't know what my creative contributions have meant to this company financially? You think I don't know how much money this company makes? What Steve Austin makes?" "Well, that's just an astronomical amount of money," he said. "Vince, I know what I'm worth. That's what I want." I left Vince's office with telling me he'd think about it. Almost 2 weeks passed and I didn't hear a word. During those 2 weeks, nothing had changed. It was all the same old BS. I was still working around the clock with no motivation. Not even the money.
When did you hear about this $1 million pitch? I hadn't heard about this until I read the book.
Yeah, I didn't hear about this until long after the fact, after Russo started going public with the whole nanny thing and everything else.
So he accepted the job with WCW as creative director on October 2nd, 1999. Russo wrote, going into WCW, a lot of people said to me, Vince, what was the difference? You were going to have to put the same amount of time in. And Russo says, the difference was there's no Vince. Again, I'm not running down the boss in any way, but unless you've been in my shoes, you couldn't fathom how taxing it was. Monday ran into Sunday, and every day was more stressful than the last. At WCW, there'd be no more trips to the salon in the city, no more phone calls on Saturday afternoon, and no more 7:30 a.m. meetings the morning following Raw. Bruce, you've worked with other promotions. This is a pretty fair assessment, is it not?
True. Working with Vince is very taxing, and it takes a lot of your time, and, it will definitely wear on you. And if you can't hang, you can't hang. So, again, that's why there's a lot of turnover there.
So here's where the rubber meets the road. Vince was expecting Russo to show up at the Meadowlands in New Jersey for Raw on Monday morning. And on Sunday night, Vince flew out of Atlanta and had to change planes in Philadelphia. It was around 10:30, and that was his only opportunity to call. So he called Vince at home the Sunday night before Raw at 10:30 at night, and Vince answered. When he realized who it was, he said, hey, pal, how's it going? And he says that his heart was wedged tightly in his throat. He thought he was going to gag. His voice was cracking, and he let it spill out. Vince, I just accepted an offer from WCW. I'm going to start with them next week. Vince thought that this was a rib, and then Russo explained, no, I just got back from Atlanta. And McMahon wanted to know why. Russo said, I have nothing left to give you. You took everything I had. And then McMahon got hot and says, I'm going after them, and I'm going to come after you. Russo says, Vince, there's nothing to come after. I've never had a contract with you. I'm sorry, Vince. And then he says McMahon tried to make the conversation ugly, but Russo wouldn't participate in that, even though he was fired up. He realized it was pointless. It was over. And he didn't want the last conversation with a man that was his idol when he was younger and later a mentor to end in an argument. So he told Vince he wasn't going to let this last conversation be an ugly one. He said he just made the best decision he could for him and his family, especially with his parents living in Florida and his wife's parents living in Indiana. Atlanta was kind of right in the middle. If nothing else, she'd be able to see her parents more, and the kids would be able to see their grandparents. McMahon says, I didn't know I was such a bad person, Vince. And Russo says, you're not. I never said that you were. I just have nothing left to give you. I love your family, but my tank is on empty. And then McMahon allegedly says, Vince, this is the most devastating phone call I've ever received. I just want you to know I was going to give you the money. Russo says it was never about the money, and McMahon says, I hope one day our paths will cross again. To this day, I've never forgotten those words. So that's directly from Russo's book. Did you ever talk to McMahon about how this call went, and how's this news received by the office and the boys? Did you find out that night or the next morning?
I found out that night from Jim Ross, and I didn't speak to Vince McMahon about it until the next day. But Vince's recollection to me was very short, that Russo called, told him that he was going to work for WCW and to move on. And that was it. There's nothing more in there about any of the conversation as he relayed. It would be very uncharacteristic, having been with Vince on a lot of these type of situations, whether they be in person or on the phone. Sounds a little fishy that Vince would have said, I would have given you the money, pal, or something like that. But again, I wasn't there, so I can't speak to that.
Russo wrote about his time in the wrestling business, but in hindsight, I'm a different animal. I'm not from that world, and I never was. What would Jim Cornette say about that?
Goddamn right, you never will be a part of this motherfucking world either. No knives, no guns, $5,000 on the goddamn hood of my fucking truck.
He says that he flew back to Stamford in July 2003 to meet with Vince because, quote, there was just something calling me back to him, a sense of unfinished business. He even compares himself to Shane in the book, saying he just wants to see Vince's soft side, his human side. And he says when he finally saw Vince in 2003, he was overcome with emotion and wanted a McMahon
explanation as to how he really felt about him, because he had been unclear all these years. And McMahon said you couldn't work that closely with someone and not care about them. And that wasn't the answer that Russo was looking for. Bruce, you worked there a long time. Why do so many grown men seek Vince's approval like this? It's a little weird.
Well, no, when you spend that much time with them, it's like being a part of your family. And I think that you just are so used to being around them. You share your lives together through so many ups and downs that when it breaks up, it's like breakup of a bad marriage. You don't want to let it go. You want to remember the good times.
Well, catch me up on your memory of Russo's return. He was back for like 3 weeks or something, right?
Yeah, he came back for a very, very short stint. I wasn't actually there the day that they made the announcement to the writing team. I was actually in Houston. My wife was in surgery. But I was getting calls throughout the day from various writers. I was getting calls from Heyman. I was getting calls from Brian Gewirtz and Michael Hayes throughout the day. So it was entertaining. Whenever I would get to a place that had reception, I would call in and go, what the hell's going on now? But they were told that Vince Russo was coming in, and he would be named the head writer over both shows, and that they should get together with him and talk about ideas. And so they all got in a room and started talking about ideas. I believe that Heyman and Brian Gewirtz were told first by Stephanie McMahon ahead of time, ahead of everybody else, before Vince McMahon brought Russo into the room. But, Russo always talks about having a room full of 30 writers or something like that. I don't think that we had more than maybe 8 people on the team, on both teams at that time. So that's kind of a gross exaggeration. But, Russo always talks about, how he improved ratings and did this and did that. And it's just, when you go back and you actually look at him, a lot of that just is not true. But Vince came into the room, and everybody, and this came from every single person to the man, from Michael, from Paul, and from Brian, that, hey, let's give him a chance and let's see what we got. If nothing else, it'll take the pressure off of us to have another intermediary between them and Stephanie. So Russo came in, they brainstormed a lot of things. I think that Russo's big idea was to strip everybody of the championships and to have tournaments. We're going to have tournaments. But he didn't know, he asked if Triple H and Chris Jericho had ever worked together when they had just headlined WrestleMania. He didn't know that a lot of people had done what they do. He had done no homework whatsoever into coming back. Is another, big idea. He wanted to bring Eric Bischoff in and do an angle with Shane, which I think everybody was in favor of, except for Vince McMahon later on, I guess. But Russo talks about how he had met with Vince days ahead and had pitched all this stuff to Vince. After Russo left that day, Vince McMahon came over to meet with the team to see what they had done. And when the team pitched all of Russo's ideas, McMahon just kind of went, what the fuck did I do? And he was taken aback. He was somewhat offended that Russo didn't even know what had headlined main event that year and didn't know just some of the basic storylines in the WWF at the time. But I think that the guys really wanted to the man. They all wanted to work with him. But I think Russo left there feeling that he was buried and talked about how Stephanie talked down to him. But I think that's just, Stephanie was younger at the time, and I think that's just the way that she came across with everybody. But nobody buried Russo. As a matter of fact, tried to work with him. And then for the next couple weeks, he sent emails and ideas on the TVs that were being written, which Vince McMahon pretty much just dismissed and felt that this was an experiment gone bad.
And that was it. Vince campaigns a lot in his book for credits. And
And he even says, why aren't there any credits at the end of Raw? It's a television show, isn't it? Why isn't anyone else being given credit? I feel like that's kind of a fair thing. Back in the day, WCW pay-per-views would go off the air and there'd be credits roll. Why doesn't the WWF give credit? What would be the harm in that?
Vince McMahon just didn't believe in him. He just really, I mean, it's as simple as that. We used to have credits on Primetime Wrestling. And that was the only show, and I think that the only reason they had credits on that is because Vince didn't watch it all the way to the end.
He also makes a comparison. Have you ever heard Phil Jackson say, yeah, it was all me, all my coaching, all that Zen nonsense. Forget Kobe and Shaq, it was me. And he compares himself and Kevin Dunn to Vince's Kobe and Shaq, but feels like they're not getting the credit they deserve. Where do you land on this, Bruce?
I think that internally they all got the credit that they deserve.
I think he means from outside.
He was looking more for it. I think he was looking more for it outside of the wrestling bubble than outside. I think he wanted to see his name in print and in paper and on credits.
What's wrong with that? You disagree? You don't think that that's worthwhile?
No, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just, okay, then go somewhere where they're going to give you credit for it. But Vince didn't believe in that. Vince didn't do credits.
He talked about, a lot happening for him during the Goldust era and the sacrifice he made. He says he basically lived the Titan Tower. He was a man possessed. Looking back now, I don't know why. I'm so caught up in the moment that I just couldn't see or hear anything else, including, again, my own family. Today I sit here embarrassed, realizing how much I sacrificed my own family for a wrestling company. During that time, they were not my priority. Work was, and I'm ashamed of it. One thing I regret deeply and that I can never make up for is that my son Will went from age 7 to age 12 while I worked from Vince, and I don't remember a single day from those years. Bruce, that's kind of the wrestling business, warts and all, in a quick summary, is it not? I mean, it can be all-consuming at times.
All I have to say to that is be careful what you wish for, because you just might get it. And it was the wrestling business before Vince Russo was in it, and it's the business now that he's not in it anymore.
Russo wrote this about why he's not in the business. It's funny, when TNA was starting up and they were talking about me coming to join them, I caught wind of a comment made by some of the people in charge. If Vince Russo was that good, why isn't he still working in the business? That attitude has always been fascinating to me. People associated with the wrestling business actually have this notion that there's nothing outside of it. If you're not in it, it's because you're not good enough. Let me ask you this. Could there even be the slightest chance that I'm no longer in the wrestling business because I choose not to be? Is that possible? Is it possible that rather than be at an arena every Monday and Tuesday night, I'd rather be at home watching Everybody Loves Raymond with my kids? Just a thought. Your response, Bruce?
Then why do you continue to petition to be in it, and how you could change it if you don't want to be in it?
We'll finish his testimony here. Bizarro Land was a place I'll never forget. There were some good times, there were some bad times. But if you ask me if I'd done anything differently, if I could trade it all in, would I? The answer is no. It is a part of me that will stay with me forever. It was a 5-year run that helped me put everything in its proper perspective. Career, money, family. In the end, it was all about my wife Amy and my 3 kids. All the money and success in the universe weren't worth my time away from them. Even though it hurt at times, I learned firsthand what really mattered the most. So that's kind of Vince Russo's story. He did talk about money, which we don't normally do on the show. When he first comes in, he's making $60,000 a year. He finishes up with the WWF at $350,000. He got some bonus checks along the way. He had that $1 million pitch for 15 months that allegedly, once he quit, Vince accepted. It's worth noting that Vince put in his book his best year in the business was $535,000 in WCW.
Come on, give me some of that HelloFresh. It's time to talk about one of my favorite sponsors because they make life so much easier. I'm telling you, once upon a time, my wife and I, it was not the best cooking experience we ever had. I just want to be honest with you. She wanted to eat different stuff than I wanted to eat. We both were sort of trying to recreate the diets that our families brought us up on. I don't know. But along the way, we had different ways of getting there. We would buy different brands. We would buy different quantities. We wound up with a bunch of extra stuff. So in an effort to save money and spend time together, well, it wound up just being a big old mess where we overspent and it wasn't all that fun. Then we found HelloFresh. Man, you want to talk about making it easy. You get to skip all the unfun stuff, all the shopping, all the meal prepping, all the planning. All that's out the window. It shows up directly at your house in a way where you get completely out of that dinner recipe rut. You know what I'm talking about. We've all been in it before, but we're going to keep mealtime exciting here. You've got now over 40 different recipes to choose from every week, thanks to our friends at HelloFresh. And you're going to love what they're doing this fall. Every bite of HelloFresh's chef-crafted recipes is fantastic. They travel from the farm to your front door in a week. So when they say fresh, they mean it. That ripeness you'll actually be able to taste. And don't get intimidated by some of the recipes that you see. I have to admit, I fell into that trap and I thought, man, that sounds awful fancy. I'm not sure I can make that. How about they got pictures? Yeah, step-by-step recipe cards with pictures. Do this, then that. How easy is that? And I know this is a busy time of year, so I want to recommend you take a look at the quick and easy options. They've even got 15-minute meals. Dude, you can't even get delivery that fast. So this is better for you, it's more affordable, and it brings the family together. How do you beat that? Oh, it's faster. That's how you beat it. They've also got all your famous yummy add-ons too. I say famous because my wife absolutely loves the apple cider cake with caramel sauce. She didn't think she would like it, but she loved it. How about the appetizers like the barbecue pulled pork nachos? That right there is Cassie, your kid's favorite. Don't forget things like the mini pumpkin cheesecake. What lady in your life wouldn't love that? Check it out. HelloFresh takes the hassle out of mealtime, but did you know it can also save you money? I want to remind you that this is cheaper than grocery shopping because there's no waste, and it's 25% less expensive than takeout. So you're going to eat better, and you're going to feel better, and you're going to save money, and it's done faster. What are you waiting for? HelloFresh is going to save you time. It's going to make you feel better. It's going to bring your family together. It's going to be done faster. It's hard to beat, man. You just can't beat it. Go right now. Try it for yourself. I encourage you. Try it one time. If you don't love it, well, send me a DM. But you're going to love it. Go to HelloFresh.com/50STW. Use the code 50STW. They're going to hook you up 50% off plus free shipping. You heard me. Go right now to HelloFresh.com/50STW and use the code 50STW for 50% off plus free shipping. I challenge you to try this. I've turned so many people in my life onto HelloFresh. I know it's sweeping the AEW locker room. I know a lot of the boys and girls in WWE are using it, but I'm talking in my mortgage life. I've got so many people sold on HelloFresh. It brings the family together. It tastes great. It's faster. It's cheaper. It's can't miss. And how do you beat 50% off plus free shipping? Go right now, HelloFresh.com/50STW and use the code 50STW. You'll get 50% off plus free shipping, and you'll find out why HelloFresh is America's #1 meal kit.
It's been reported that on the May 20th Raw, prior to the show going live, Nash and Waltman pull what's been described as a power play backstage, threatening to quit if something wasn't rewritten. And they do this grandstand when Vince and Stephanie aren't there. Shane McMahon is there, and he gives in to their demands. Do you remember what the story on this was? Does any of this ring a bell?
It rings a bell because I wasn't there. And as we talked about earlier, I was in Houston with my wife going through treatment, but I heard about it long distance.
And what did you hear? Like, what happened?
I heard that obviously none of us were there, Vince and Stephanie in particular, and that guys, and it wasn't just X-Pac and Nash, but that the boys were trying to get to Shane and trying to influence Shane to change everything, and Shane being there alone and being the authority figure in real life may have gotten a little overwhelmed, but that's hearsay, and that's getting it from different sources that were there going, oh shit, we had all this stuff approved by Vince and Steph, and everybody's on board, and now they're changing shit, and we don't have Vince to come in and be that final, the buck stops here.
What did Vince think when this happened?
He wasn't pleased.
Is the heat on Nash for pushing to get something changed, or is the heat on Shane for allowing it, or both?
Both. But I would have to think It's always going to be on the kids. It's always, if I was there, the heat would have been on me. So it's always going to be on the kid. Damn it, Shane, you should have done this. You should have done that. You do the best you can in the situations in which you are in.
On the June 3rd Raw, Nash said he has a big announcement to make, and later in the show, he comes down and said he's going to announce a new member of the NWO, Shawn Michaels. Whose idea was it to bring Shawn in, and what was the long-term plan with this storyline?
The idea to bring Shawn back was obviously Shawn was feeling a little better, feeling a little froggy, thinking about coming back, and it was another way to introduce a new old character back into the fold. The last time that Hall and Nash were in WWF, they were together. They were feuding against each other, but everybody knew the clique and the friendship between Kevin Nash and Shawn Michaels. So it was a way to kind of reintroduce him, but we weren't really sure at this point. There was really no talk of Shawn even coming back full time. This was just let's test the waters, see what's out there. Maybe Shawn will get the bug.
A few days before this, Shawn was on the WWF Confidential show, and this is a shoot type show they did for a little while on the weekends, kind of a short-lived program, but it was fun. And during this program where Shawn is on it, he publicly admits for the first time that he knew about the Montreal screw job. Prior to this, he had just denied it. So that happens, and then he's on Raw, so Shawn's back in a big way. On the June 10th Raw, Shawn comes out for his big promo and a loud HBK chant. Shawn starts off very humble and reserved. He says it's the fans who decide which direction they go as an organization. And he said it was you fans that dumped me and ran to Steve Austin like a cheap nickel and dime prostitute runs to a millionaire.
Whores.
Thank you. I was hoping you'd give me the Terry Funk line.
They're all whores.
Shawn said that the one man who stood behind him at every step, who stayed his friend through thick and thin, was Kevin Nash. The NWO comes out. Shawn says he noticed that someone didn't quite fit in the NWO, and he teased it being Big Show and X-Pac, and then Superkick Booker, and says, I thought to myself, well, you're the problem. You see, he's tried to steal the spotlight from the NWO just like Austin tried to steal it from me, just like The Rock tries to steal it from Hunter. So Booker T is literally kicked out of the NWO here. Is the decision here, let's just try to pare this back down to the clique and get rid of this WCW guy?
Somewhat, yes.
Is there any sort of heat for what Shawn's saying here about The Rock tries to steal it from Hunter?
No, that was all written for him.
Okay. Real quick before we move on, Booker gets paired up with Goldust, and I don't know when we're going to talk about this again.
Oh, we will.
This is some hilarious stuff. Whose idea was it to pair them together? We'll talk about all the skits and segments and all that another time, but who puts them together?
Brian Gewirtz, and Brian Gewirtz produced all those damn vignettes with them, the Star Wars shit. I mean, that was some of the greatest stuff ever.
King of the Ring, the NWO's backstage with Triple H, and he's about to face The Undertaker for the undisputed title. So he hugs a lot of the guys, says what's up to them, and they start to tease that maybe Triple H will join the group. Was there ever any consideration to kind of put the whole clique together here and have them all be a part of the NWO, or did the talks never get that serious about Triple H joining?
It only got to the talking stage. So there wasn't anything more to it. Oh, hey, we could do this, we could do that. It was kind of, what if?
Things continue to go south. Nash returns to the ring on July 8th, and this time it's in a 10-man tag team match. You know where this is going. It's Kevin Nash, Eddie Guerrero, X-Pac, Chris Benoit, and Big Show against Rob Van Dam, Bubba Ray Dudley, Spike Dudley, Booker T, and Goldust. During the match, Nash is tagged in. You know how this ends. He's running across the ring. He suddenly collapses, starts clutching his knee and screaming in pain. Hebner holds up the infamous crossed-armed X and lets everybody in the back know something bad has just happened. And this is the exact same injury you may remember that Triple H took about a year earlier, maybe, and it kept him out of the ring for 8 months. He tears his quad. What was the reaction to this? Obviously, this was like the worst string of bad luck ever. Nash was hurt, and you kind of insinuated maybe it wasn't legitimate in the backstage segment with Bradshaw. He didn't have a match at WrestleMania, and so now he's injured with Bradshaw, and now he's torn his quad, which is a pretty damn major injury, and it happens in his first match back. Is this just the worst bad luck ever for the WWE and Kevin Nash at this point?
It just goes back to the NWO storyline coming in with Snake Bit, and just the hits kept coming. And this was another one. It just wasn't meant to be. So Kevin getting hurt and tearing his quad was the nail in the coffin for the NWO experiment in the WWE.
Yeah, it really did spell the end immediately. The next week, July 15th, the NWO music plays, but Vince comes out, and he says the reason he came out to that music was so the fans could hear it one final time, because there is no more NWO. The NWO is now history. And he said it was just an era that is over, like many other eras in WWE history. Does it feel, to me, it feels like after Hogan breaks away from the group, it's kind of over. That's like strike one.
It really was.
And then when Scott Hall is fired, that's strike two. And now with Nash going down, what do we got left?
You got nothing.
Yeah.
You got nothing. You have the NWO Wolfpack.
Is there any sort of heat on Kevin Nash during this time? Because he's not working at WrestleMania, which I find curious. He has this injury that you kind of hint is maybe less than legitimate against Bradshaw. And then he has a very real injury with tearing the quad on Raw. It feels like they've spent a lot of time, effort, energy, and cash here, and they're not getting a return. But it's not like he intentionally tears his fucking quad. Come on. Is there any heat?
I don't know. There's heat. There's disappointment.
Right.
Because we had high hopes. We really wanted this thing to work, and we're hoping that we would be able to get some benefit out of the damn thing. And it never came to fruition.
Let's kind of briefly touch on what everybody does. We'll talk about it in greater detail later. Big Show and X-Pac break off, start doing their own things. Michaels starts a feud with Triple H, which leads to his full-time return at SummerSlam. He ends up becoming a world champ and does a lot. People thought Triple H and Shawn Michaels were going to have a one-off at the time at SummerSlam, and it really became some of the best work of Shawn Michaels' career in the second act. Nash returned to the WWF on April 7th of 2003. He was attacked by Triple H. They started a feud for Triple H's world title. He loses a hair versus hair match to Jericho later that year and then leaves in January of 2004 when the company doesn't renew his contract. I'm sure we'll have lots of stuff about what Hogan does, but he goes on to lose the undisputed title to The Undertaker at Judgment Day 2002 in Nashville about a month after he won it from Triple H. He has a feud with Kurt Angle, who we just covered in great detail last week, losing to him at the King of Ring in 2002 by tap out. You can go hear all about that in last week's episode. And we also want to touch on the fact that Hogan would actually tag team with Edge and win the WWE tag team titles, which I can't wait to cover someday. They defeated Billy and Chuck on the 4th of July SmackDown, which is awesome. And then they lost those to Christian and Lance Storm. Not a bunch of names you'd normally see associated with Hogan. A fun time in his career there, at least for me. Of course, we all remember the Mr. America thing. That comes out of the WrestleMania 19 street fight match he had with Mr. McMahon. And his last appearance at this time was the June 26th episode of SmackDown, where he teamed with Kurt Angle and Brock Lesnar, and they lose to Big Show, Charlie Haas, and Shelton Benjamin. And there's been lots of rumor and innuendo, and I want to touch on it, and then we'll move on and kind of put a bow on this week's episode. But there's been a lot of talk on Hogan leaving here in 2003 because he's unhappy with payoffs, specifically his WrestleMania payoff. There's been lots of rumor and innuendo out there that he thought it should be a lot more. he and Vince came to an impasse, and Vince terminates the contract. What really happened?
This is something we'll get into later, and the story really is too long to get into here. But I was inadvertently kind of thrust right into the middle of it, and it stemmed over money. Yeah, it stemmed over money.
So there you go. That's kind of what
we will get into it. That's a long that's going to be in that Hogan episode. That's a long explanation and a long, convoluted, crazy story that we don't nearly have enough time here for today.
Well, I'm looking forward to that one. I think that run of Hogan's career is often overlooked, but it's an important part of the history of Hulk Hogan in the World Wrestling Federation, or WWE, whatever you prefer to call it. Let's kind of wrap up the NWO here, Bruce. Even though their run was very brief in the WWE, and they had one monstrous match with Hogan and Rock at WrestleMania, would you consider overall this to be a success?
No, I would take it. I think it was a failure. The NWO experiment in WWF was a failure.
Was it a bad idea from the start?
I think the idea was good. The execution was not. There are a lot of things, hindsight being 2020, that maybe we should have done a little bit differently.
Brett says on September 25th, he's in Los Angeles to do a guest appearance on The Simpsons. When his lawyer, Barry Bloom, tells him that Eric Bischoff wants to meet with him whenever he gets to Los Angeles. So when Brett lands and gets to the hotel, Eric's already on his way to his room. And Eric says something like, "What's it going to take to bring you to WCW?" And Brett says, "I want the exact same contract as Hulk Hogan plus 1 penny." Of course, Bischoff says he can't do anything like that right now. And Brett says, "I'm not really looking to go anywhere. I'm happy where I'm at." And Eric persists. "Come on, at least give me something I can go back to my people with." And Brett says, "I'd think about coming to work for you guys for $3 million a year and a lighter schedule." And Eric actually says, "Well, at least I have a number now. Let me take it back to the Turner people in Atlanta." 2 days later, on September 27th, Bischoff calls and offers Brett a contract for $2.8 million a year for 3 years to go to WCW. And Brett says he'd think about it. Well, of course, rumors get out because of Carl DeMarco. Carl DeMarco calls and tells Vince what's up. And then Vince calls and says, "Hey, I'm hearing rumors that you've already signed." And he says, "No, I haven't signed, and I won't do anything until we talk." So they talk that weekend. And Brett's asking for $3 million for 3 years for 180 days a year. And he wants Vince to match it. Vince says he can't match it. So he gives him the best offer he can. And he promises to make this offer in person. And he does so on October 9th. He flies up to Calgary and does it in person. And during the meeting, Brett would tell Vince about the Wrestling with Shadows documentary. And Vince said he had no problem giving Paul access to the matches in the backstage area. Before we continue about the contract, do you think if Brett wouldn't have brought this up at this moment where he's trying to re-sign him, there's any fucking chance Wrestling with Shadows gets made?
Probably not. And see, there's another big part that, I don't think I've ever really shared. Well, I have in some different things, but, the big part that's missing there was during this same time frame that Hulk Hogan's contract with WCW was coming up.
I've actually got that in my notes here, and that's how Vince helps close the deal, right?
And well, no, not really. I mean, it was we had many a late night at the office, kind of going over, figures and who's it going to be? Do we invest X amount in trying to get Hulk, or do we invest X amount in keeping Brett? Is it a big enough get for the WWF to bring Hogan back and let them take Brett? Or do we keep Brett and focus on him?
Meltzer wrote, one of the interesting keys to the story is that, and I think everybody listening to this knows, that Brett had still been pissed off since 1993 when Hogan left without putting Brett over. He feels like that wasn't done the right way. The whole WrestleMania deal what was maybe going to happen at SummerSlam. He feels like he's kind of been jilted by Hulk Hogan. So you would think that would be a negative. You don't want to go to WCW and have to work with Hulk Hogan and Ric Flair, who you've had problems with. But somewhere in these negotiations, Vince says something like, Hogan and Randy Savage's WCW contracts are both coming due between now and the end of the year. And he suggested it was possible, or even more than possible, that one or both of them might actually wind up back in the WWF in 97, which of course makes you think that Bret might see this as an opportunity to finally get this return win and get this win over Hulk Hogan. I feel like this is a pretty masterful thing for Vince to drip out here, because if you know that it's a hot button of Bret's, that he really, really wants to beat Hulk Hogan because he takes his character very seriously. Maybe that's pretty smart.
No, that wasn't what he pitched. And it was never that was never even considered, because it was an either or situation.
But Bret probably didn't know it was an either or.
I believe that there were probably in Bret's mind and people, on the outside going, hey, Hogan's contract's coming up. I hear he's talking to Vince, and Bret thinking, oh, I can get this done in his mind. But truly and I was 100% a part of all of that. That was never the case. It was an either or situation. And we had to pick them, and we picked Bret.
I'm not suggesting it wasn't either or. I'm just saying Bret may not have known it, and it may have been something that Vince could just float out there. What if? And it'd be attractive. Ultimately, Vince offers Bret a 20-year deal for $10.5 million. It's $1.5 million a year for 3 years as a wrestler, $500,000 for the next 7 as one of his senior advisors, and then $250,000 a year after for the next 10 years, which, I guess makes him like the Babe Ruth of the company. And then Vince said something like, I'll never give you a reason to ever want to leave. And Bret said WCW was offering almost that same amount for 3 years, but he just couldn't leave Vince. So he accepted the offer, and they shook hands. Meltzer would write, after a bidding war the likes of which have never been seen in this profession, Bret Hart appears to be likely choosing the World Wrestling Federation for a deal that may pay him more over 4 years than any wrestler in history, with the exception of Hulk Hogan, has made in a career. Was there instant regret about offering Bret such a deal? It feels like everybody feels like this was a bad deal from the jump.
No, not from the jump. No. And because we were looking at, it was a defensive move in many regards. It was both offensive and defensive, but a lot of it was defensive. We didn't want him to go to WCW. We felt that was a hit that would have hurt us much more so than the other ones. The other ones were hurting us. It seemed like every other day that people were heading over to WCW. So we didn't want one of our biggest stars, a homegrown star to go there as well. And the math worked. Neville Meyer, who was the CEO at the time, is the one who kind of orchestrated this whole thing as far as a way to structure the deal. And it made sense at the time.
One of the things I found interesting is the way Meltzer reported this story once it was signed. He would say that Titan sources said McMahon didn't come anywhere close to that $3 million WCW offer, but WCW sources say not only did he match it, he upped it. And sources close to Hart basically confirmed the WCW story and claimed McMahon offered just under $4 million per year for a 4-year deal, which is more than one would think the company could even afford given the revenue it takes in. Allegedly, the $4 million per year number is not all in cash, but with a series of goodies that all added up, if liquidated, would come to $4 million a year. He goes on and on about how nobody besides Hulk Hogan has ever even earned that amount of money in their career, much less over a 3 or 4 year period. When you guys hear about this $4 million number, which is clearly inaccurate, but Bret's people are confirming it and WCW is confirming it, which is good for business. I get it. I mean, is this just passed around the office and everybody's laughing? $4 million a year, there's no chance.
No, there's no chance. It's just complete fabrication. But again, that's the kind of stuff that Dave Meltzer reports as fact and thing. Yeah, I'll give you a fact. You want me to talk numbers? I'll give you numbers. You know what my budget was that year for the entire roster?
What?
$9 million.
So
that was my budget.
Your 1996 budget was $9 million.
Right.
So yeah, you're not going to give almost half of that to one guy.
Right.
We should mention here, because we're going to talk about this later in a different way. Bret's old deal was signed in September of 1992, and it gave him the option to leave at any time he wanted with a 90-day notice. He negotiated that when he learned the hard way in 92, when he tried to leave for WCW while still the Intercontinental Champion. Let me say that again. In 1992, but nobody talks about this, Bret is the Intercontinental Champion and tries to leave the World Wrestling Federation for WCW while he's the Intercontinental Champion. But apparently those contracts were automatically renewable and only allowed the 90-day notice during a certain window each year. So when Bret discovers this and resigns, is forced to resign, he says, okay, but now I can leave anytime I want with a 90-day notice. Smarten everybody up who might not be on the loop about the time that Bret tried to jump to WCW in 1992.
Well, my name's Tony Schiavone, and I wasn't there. I wasn't there when he did that.
Well, but you heard about it. So do what you do every other time I ask you a question. Make some shit up.
Okay. Well, he wanted to go and he said, I'm leaving. No. The issue is like on the auto renewal is you had 90 days before your contract renews to give your notice one way or another. And obviously Bret didn't know that clause existed in his contract. Otherwise it just renews. So I had heard the rumblings, but nobody really took it seriously because he was under contract and on the WWF side, they just felt that was a bunch of rumor and innuendo and bullshit because he couldn't go anywhere. So they were protected.
So he agreed to this contract just a little while before the Fort Wayne, Indiana Raw on October 21st, 1996. And in this promo, he does a live interview where he acknowledges the offer from a rival wrestling company, which he praised and said they handled him honestly and with integrity. And, they were good guys, but Vince wanted him in the middle of this to tear up the WCW contract on live TV. And of course, this is supposedly the idea for retaliation after Medusa threw the women's belt in a trash can. Do you remember asking Bret to tear up the WCW contract on TV? I hadn't heard that before.
No. And it was as simple as, Bret coming out and give us your decision. Now, Vince kayfabed everybody on what his decision was. I know that Vince knew and I knew, but there was still that tinge of we're live. He had played games with us all the way up into this point. Is he going to get out there on live TV and go the other way? So there was that tinge, that unknown and that uneasy feeling with everybody. Oh my God, Cornette was going nuts. Oh damn, what's he going to do? So I guess we'll find out.
It's worth mentioning when WCW was offering him $2.8 million a year, only $800,000 of that was supposed to be for wrestling, and that's for 180 dates. The other $2 million came from 2 movies per year at $1 million per movie. And that was going to be through Turner Time Warner. And they were trying to structure a deal that was similar to Hulk Hogan, where WCW wouldn't have all the expense on their books, so it would still look like they were running a profitable company. And allegedly, this whole contract with Bret gets everybody fired up in WCW because, according to the rumor and innuendo, Hall and Nash have a clause in their contract that says they have to be the highest paid behind Hogan. So if somebody comes in and gets a bump, well, they get a bump too. So allegedly they're making around $780 a year. So if it's just $800,000 for wrestling and it's structured that way, then they only get a $20,000 bump. But if those movies aren't stipulated, now it's a $2.8 million contract and those guys are getting an extra $2 million a year. Has anyone in wrestling ever negotiated such a clause like that before or after that you know of?
Not that I know of. That was the first time I'd ever heard it, and the last time that I know of anybody ever getting something like that.
I just find that whole signing thing really fascinating. We should mention here that the WCW contract was in his back pocket, according to the rumor and innuendo, when he did that promo.
Hey, it's Conrad Thompson here to tell you a little more about what adfreeshows.com is all about. Get early, ad-free access to more than a dozen of your favorite wrestling podcasts every single week, starting at just $9. That's less than 20 cents an episode each month. And yes, you can listen to them all directly through Apple Podcasts or your regular podcast apps. How easy is that? Ad-free shows also has thousands of hours worth of bonus content and docuseries like Title Chase, Eric Fires Back, Conversations with Conrad, and The Insiders. Plus new series like The Book with David Crockett, Monday Mailbags with Mike Chioda and Nick Patrick, and a whole lot more. And you want to talk about early? You can't get any earlier than listening to the shows live. You can be a part of the live studio audience as we record the podcast. Plus, ride shotgun alongside your favorite childhood heroes for live watch-alongs, Q&As, and other interactive experiences every single month. Come on now, see for yourself what thousands of other wrestling fans from around the world have discovered, that adfreeshows.com is the best value in wrestling. Check it out today, and hey, when you do, the first week is completely free. adfreeshows.com.